Chapter 1. It's said that, in ancient times, we humans didn't live on this continent. Instead, we came from another continent far away. A long, long time ago, we humans were living a happy and carefree life on another continent. But at some point in time, some devils came to this continent and began to tempt humans. Gradually, under the influence of these devils, our humans became selfish, greedy, depraved, and then fought and killed each other endlessly. When the Almighty God saw all this, He was very sad and decided to punish us. Thus, the God cast a curse, making it difficult for the land to grow crop. It was very difficult to harvest from the land. Even so, the humans still didn't repent. Instead, they became even worse. They were cold, selfish, and cruel. Humans were branded with the brand of original sin. At this time, the God began to regret creating humans. Furthermore, because the actions of humans had crossed His bottom line, His anger could no longer be contained. Thus, the God decided to launch a natural disaster to destroy humans and destroy everything. The natural disaster began to descend. All the volcanoes on the continent erupted at the same time. All the rivers flooded, and the rain never stopped. Lightning filled the sky, and the earth began to crack. Humans were met with a disaster. As the God's messenger, Noah couldn't bear to see this scene. Thus, he mustered up his courage and begged the God to retract his order and not bring disaster to humans. In order to save humans, Noah begged the God for 7 days and 7 nights. He knelt and didn't get up. His sincerity finally moved the God. When the God saw the tragic state of the continent, he also felt some regret. However, it was already too late. The natural disaster had already occurred. The entire continent was devastated, and it was like hell. This continent was no longer suitable for humans to live in. In the face of all this, the God was powerless. In the end, it was Noah who thought of a way. He built a ship. This ship was about 300 kilometers long, 50 kilometers wide, and 30 kilometers tall. It was a super huge ship, so big that it was unimaginable. Noah named it the Ark. He put all the living creatures, humans, and even birds and beasts that were still alive into the Ark. On one hand, it was to take refuge, and on the other hand, it was to find a new continent suitable for humans to live in. The Ark traveled for many days, and all we could see was an endless sea. We couldn't see any land at all. It made us feel hopeless. Even Noah felt very depressed. After another 10 days, Noah opened the window of the Ark and released a crow to gather information, but the crow never returned. Noah released another pigeon, but the pigeon couldn't find a place to land in the vast sea, so it flew back to the Ark. After another 7 days, Noah released the pigeons again. At dusk, the pigeons flew back with olive leaves in their beak. It was obvious that they had pecked the leaves off the trees. After another 7 days, Noah released the pigeons again. This time, the pigeons did not return. This means that they have finally found land. Noah was very happy to have found a new continent, so he led the humans to live and reproduce on this new continent, living a happy life. As for Noah, he became a hero and a legend. He was the savior of mankind. People named this new continent after him, which is the land we are standing on now, the continent of Noah. His name was even written into the calendar. The calendar started from the day he stepped into the continent of Noah, and it was called the first year of Noah. In the west of the continent of Noah, in a place called Maple Leaf Town, under a banyan tree beside a bluestone road, a white-haired old man was telling a fairy tale vividly. Beside him, a group of children around 11 or 12 years old were listening to him attentively. In the middle of this group of children, there was a figure that did not fit in. It was a child who looked particularly thin and weak. His big eyes were blinking, and he had long been fascinated by the story. Unlike the children beside him, due to long-term malnutrition, his body was particularly thin. Instead, it made his skull look particularly big, looking like a little radish head. His clothes were much more tattered than the average child. The most conspicuous places were patched up, and there were a few holes in some places, revealing his fair skin. His hair was also messy. The old man was a resident of Maple Leaf Town. He was telling the story of Noah's Ark to these children. The authenticity of this story could not be verified, but it was very widely spread. "Grandpa, you said that Noah's Ark was a big ship. He carried the people of the entire continent. How big was this ship?" Just as the old man's saliva was flying everywhere, he was interrupted by an untimely voice. The old man looked and saw that it was the skinniest child. His name was Ron. The old man was interrupted by Ron's words, but he was not angry at all. He said with a smile, "A ship that could carry all the people and creatures must be very big. It's so big that you can't imagine it." Ron said softly, "Oh," and then asked with interest, "Then how did Noah know which direction to go to find the new continent? What if he couldn't find it?" The old man was obviously stumped. He had never thought about this question before. He stammered, There must be instructions from the gods." When he said this, the old man was not sure. In the legend, there was no such thing. Since the gods are omnipotent, why didn't they restore the original continent? Wouldn't that be better? Also, all the creatures on the continent are on that ship. How do they live? What do they eat? Is there food on the ship? How long can it last? Ron tilted his head and asked. His questions flew out of his mouth like a cannon. At this time, he might as well get to the bottom of it. The old man really could not answer this time. At this time, the group of children who were listening next to them were dissatisfied. One of the taller children said, "Hey, Ron, if you want to listen to a story, then listen to a story. Why are you asking so many questions? Go away, go away. We are listening to a story. Why are you joining in the fun?" "Yes, even if you don't want to listen, we want to listen." These children shouted and began to drive Ron away. Their eyes showed a look of disgust. It was not because of anything else. Ron was a famous street child in Maple Leaf Town. He only had a crippled grandfather to rely on. To put it bluntly, he was a beggar. Although these children who were listening to the story were not born into rich families, they were still children of commoners. In terms of status, they were much higher than him. Naturally, they looked down on the beggar Ron. Seeing the children arguing, the old man lost interest in telling the story. He stood up and patted the dust off his body. He said, "Today's story ends here. Everyone can go back." After that, he ignored those people and turned around to leave. Although the children were reluctant to part, there was no story to listen to, so they dispersed in a hubbub, leaving Ron standing there alone. The autumn wind blew, blowing a few leaves. Ron stood on the empty road and could not help but feel a trace of coldness. He could not help but tighten his clothes and said to himself, "That's it? I haven't finished asking my questions. What happened to Noah in the end? Where is the ark now? Alas!" He shook his head helplessly. As a street child, Ron did not know how many people had rolled their eyes at him since he was a child. Ridicule had made him numb. It was just that he did not finish listening to the story, so his heart was somewhat regretful. Ron looked up at the sky. There was still some time before the sun went down. His mind was active again. "Hey, it's still early. I'll go to the Maple Forest Ancient Road to try my luck then." Ron ran in the direction of the Maple Forest Ancient Road. The Maple Forest Ancient Road was the only way to and from Maple Leaf Town. Countless adventurers would pass through here. The place Ron wanted to go was exactly here. The Maple Forest Ancient Road was covered with fallen maple leaves. The autumn wind blew, blowing a withered yellow. "Well, I'll just wait here for a while." Ron looked around and found a clean place to sit down. He looked at the empty Maple Forest Ancient Road vigilantly. His ears were erect, as if he was waiting for something. Maple Leaf Town was located in a remote place. It was not a lively place. There were neither resources nor treasures, and there was no beautiful scenery. The only thing worth seeing was the falling maple leaves in autumn. However, this obviously could not attract adventurers. The number of people who walked through the Maple Forest Ancient Road every day could be counted with 10 fingers. It was normal that no one passed by for a day. The life of the townspeople of Maple Leaf Town was peaceful, like a pool of stagnant water. The townspeople worked every day at sunrise and rested at sunset. Their lives were dull and fulfilling. The folk customs here were very simple. Even for penniless wanderers like Ron and his grandfather, the townspeople of Maple Leaf Town did not drive them away violently. They even extended a helping hand. Whoever had leftovers would take the initiative to give them. Over the years, Ron could be said to have grown up in Maple Leaf Town. However, due to poor nutrition, he had never grown tall. He even looked a little thin and weak. In this way, Ron and his grandfather lived in Maple Leaf Town. They lived in the only river in the town, under the bridge by the side, and casually built a shelter. His grandfather was called Zachary. His legs were disabled and he couldn't walk. Naturally, he couldn't do any work. Every day, he used his hands to push a 4-wheeled flatbed cart to the bridge, waiting for the townspeople to give him alms. In Maple Leaf Town, you could basically get some leftovers every day. Sometimes, during festivals or when the townspeople had happy events, you could get a few copper coins as a reward. Ron, on the other hand, would help the townspeople with some chores in the morning. He didn't get paid, but it was already good enough that he had a meal to eat. In the afternoon, he would come to this maple leaf ancient path and wait quietly. He would wait until the sky turned dark before reluctantly returning to his simple and crude home. Since Ron was 8 years old, this habit had been persisting for 7 years. Until now, Ron was already 10 pornographic novels. 5 years old. What was he waiting for? Chapter 2. Shaw, Shaw, Shaw. At this time, a traveler came from afar on the ancient maple path. This traveler was wearing a black robe and a hood. His whole body was covered by a black cloak, and his face was covered with a black veil. Only a pair of eyes could be seen, vigilantly staring ahead. If it wasn't for the azure magic staff in his left hand, no one would know his profession. Obviously, this was a magician, and seeing that he was alone, one could tell that he was a wandering magician. Search for the latest updates here. It was said that magicians generally didn't act alone, and most of them had followers. If one encountered a wandering magician, one had to be careful because such magicians were often very powerful. The ancient maple path was very calm in the afternoon, and from time to time, there would be a few birds chirping, adding a sense of serenity to this small forest. After crossing that bridge, we will enter Maple Leaf Town. This way we can have a good rest. The black-robed magician's eyes showed a trace of a smile. After several days of hurrying on the road, he was a little tired. Suddenly, the black-robed magician stopped abruptly and looked around vigilantly. His face sank. "Who is here? Come out." The forest was still very quiet, and the only answer he got was the rustling sound of the wind blowing through the leaves. The black-robed magician frowned and took a step forward. The magic staff in his hand fiercely slammed down, and he sternly shouted, "Who is here? Come out quickly. If you don't come out, don't blame me for being impolite." With that, he waved his hand and was about to condense magic, which was the prelude to an attack. "Sir Magician, please calm down." At this time, from the grass beside him, a thin and small figure was awkwardly drilling out. The person who came was Ron. He rolled to the front of the magician, showing a humble expression, nodding and bowing as he said, "Respected Sir Magician, please calm down. My name is Ron, a resident of Maple Leaf Town. I salute you here." With that said, he performed the standard etiquette of the Noah continent. "Damn, you scared me. I thought it was an enemy." Seeing the beggar like Ron, the black-robed magician cursed in his heart, but he also let down his guard. This child won't be in any danger. He put away his magic staff and said impatiently, "Humph, you little rascal, why are you hiding there so sneakily? If it wasn't for the fact that Ron was just a child and couldn't be bothered to argue with him, he would have already scolded him. "It's like this, respected Mr. Mage. Ron has a favor to ask of you," Ron said nervously. "I want to learn magic, please accept me as your disciple." Ron sincerely knelt on the ground and walked to the wandering magician on his knees. His whole body prostrated at the magician's feet and gently kissed his boot. This was the most humble etiquette for the commoners of the Noah continent to the strong. Ron raised his head and looked nervously at the black-robed magician. His eyes were filled with strong expectations, and his heart was beating wildly. His palms were sweating. "Apprentice?" The black-robed magician frowned and looked at him quietly. He neither nodded nor refused, just stood there quietly. He's considering? He's actually considering? Will he agree? Will he accept me as his disciple? Ron's heart was in his throat, and there was a glimmer of hope in his heart. "Humph!" The black-robed wandering mage snorted softly, turned around, and left without saying a word. It was as if he had never seen Ron before. He didn't pay any attention to Ron's request. He didn't even have the interest to look at him, let alone say a word. Looking at the magician's back, Ron's hopeful eyes suddenly dimmed. He knew that he had failed again, and his face was full of disappointment. "I failed again." Ron sighed and stood up silently. "How many times has it been?" "Counting it, it's 75 times. I've actually been rejected 75 times. I'm really not popular," Ron said self-deprecatingly. He patted the dirt off his body and returned to the place where he was sitting just now. Although Ron was just a homeless child with nothing, he also had a dream, which was to become a great magician. But for him, it was simply impossible. It was not easy to learn magic in the Noah continent. First, he had to go to a specialized school to learn magic. But the tuition was not something that ordinary people could afford, not to mention the penniless Ron. Of course, to learn magic, one didn't have to go to school. If one wanted to learn something, as long as someone was willing to teach, then there was no problem. Anyway, it was all the same. But who would want to spend the effort to teach a little beggar? So in these 7 years, Ron had been lying in ambush here countless times, waiting for an opportunity. He dreamed that one day, a powerful magician would pass by, be moved by his sincerity, and be kind enough to accept him as a disciple. This way, he could learn magic. 7 years had passed, and on this maple forest ancient road, there were many magicians passing by, but Ron had not met a single kind magician. When some magicians passed by with mercenaries, Ron did not dare to stop them. It would be terrible if he was killed by those mercenaries who killed without batting an eye. He only dared to stop those magicians who had fewer people and were alone. Generally speaking, a noble magician would not be too calculative with a little beggar like him. If he met a good-tempered magician, he would just kick him a couple of times. If he met a bad-tempered magician, he would be beaten up. Ignoring him like today was already considered very good. Why did he reject me? Was it because my attitude was not respectful enough? But I have already used the highest etiquette in the Noah continent. Was it because I spoke inappropriately? Maybe I should improve on this next time. Well, it could also be that I scared him before and made him angry. If I had come out earlier, the chances of success would have been higher. What a pity, why did I take so long to think? Ron kept looking for reasons for his failure. He patted his head in annoyance. Ron thought that because he was thinking about how to answer this noble magician, he came out a little late, which led to his failure. In fact, those arrogant magicians would not put such a commoner beggar in a pornographic novel. In their eyes, not beating him up was good enough. Even if they killed him, Ron could not do anything. With Ron's identity, living an ordinary life might be a good ending. However, even a little beggar had his own dreams. Ron sat on the grass and lay down directly. He plucked a blade of grass and put it in his mouth. He continued to wait for a long and fruitless time. Magician, I'm really looking forward to it. If only I could become a magician. As long as I have a chance, I will definitely study hard and not be lazy. Thinking of magicians, Ron's heart became hot again. These 3 words seemed to be engraved in his heart. He would never forget that day. It was the first time he saw a powerful magician. She was a female magician. He saw her gently wave the magic staff in her hand, and a ball of hot flame appeared in her hand. Then, the ball of flame seemed to have grown eyes and flew towards its target. In the blink of an eye, the blind rogue was burned to ashes by the flame of the female magician. The power of the magician shocked him. Ron made a vow to become a magician. Am I destined to be unable to become a magician in this life? Ron thought. His pitch-black eyes looked helplessly at the blue sky, as if the sky would tell him the answer. However, failure after failure made him feel disheartened. No. I will never. Suddenly, Ron became agitated and sat up. Grandfather said that as long as one is willing to work hard, anything is possible. The great founding emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Charles I, was born a commoner. The powerful wind swordsman of the sacred domain was only a lowly servant in the beginning. Can I, Ron, not become a magician? I don't believe that there won't be a day when a nobody like me can rise up in this world. He suddenly clenched his fists. I don't want to live a mediocre life. I want to become a powerhouse. It doesn't matter if the opportunity doesn't come. I'm willing to wait. If one day isn't enough, I'll wait a year. If 1 year isn't enough, I'll wait 10 years. If 10 years isn't enough, I'll wait my whole life. If I don't believe that I can become a magician. Suddenly, Ron stood up. He cupped his hands around his mouth and used all his strength to shout to the sky. I will, definitely, become a great demon sorcerer. Ron's voice echoed in the valley, as if mocking him for his unrealistic thoughts. After shouting, Ron's confidence seemed to have rekindled. He looked at the sky. It's still early. Why don't we wait a little longer? Maybe there will be magicians passing by. He burrowed into the grass again and found a place to sit down. He continued to pay attention to the ancient maple path. Unfortunately, by the time the sun set in the west, there was not even a shadow of a person on the ancient maple path, let alone a magician. Ron could only go home with a disappointed heart. Just like that, day after day, year after year, Ron continued to wait on the ancient maple path, waiting for groups of 3 to 5 magicians to pass by alone. Although he came across opportunities, they were all rejected without exception. Even so, Ron did not lose heart. On this day, a magician came from afar on the ancient maple path. He was a kind-looking old man, wearing a white magician's robe. His face was flushed red, and he rode on a handsome white horse. Naturally, Ron would not let go of this opportunity. He immediately rushed out to stop the old man and knelt in front of him. Honorable Mr. Magician, I want to learn magic. Please accept me as your disciple. He bowed deeply, his eyes shining with anticipation. Inconceivably, the white-robed old magician actually reined in his horse. He smiled and asked kindly, You want to learn magic? When Ron heard this, his wildly beating heart turned into ecstasy. Yes, Honorable Mr. Magician, are you willing to teach me? The white-robed old magician chuckled softly. Learning magic is a very difficult thing, isn't it? Aren't you afraid of suffering? When Ron heard this, he quickly nodded, his face full of joy. Honorable Mr. Magician, I'm not afraid of suffering. Please accept me as your disciple, he. The white-robed magician laughed heartily. Since you have such perseverance and willpower, I'll make an exception and accept you as my disciple. Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Mr. Magician. Ron did not expect that his dream of many years would finally become a reality. He hurriedly bowed deeply, at the same time kissing the white-robed magician's boot. I'm leaving. If you want to be my disciple, pack your things and come with me. The white-robed old magician kindly touched Ron's head and smiled. Ron excitedly rubbed his nose with his index finger. Ouch! Ron softly exclaimed and sat up. At the same time, he shooed away the bird on his nose. The bird had just fiercely pecked his nose a few times. Chapter 3. Goo-goo-goo. At this time, Ron's stomach failed to live up to his expectations and began to growl. He looked up at the sky. It turned out that the sun had begun to quietly set. It's time to go back, Ron said to himself. He got up, patted the dust off his body, and ran in the direction of Maple Leaf Town. Search for the latest update is here. He knew that his grandfather must have left a good meal waiting for him. In his memory, his grandfather, who was also a beggar, was very good to him. He left the best food for him. Sometimes he would rather starve himself. Stepping into the familiar Maple Leaf Town and walking on the gravel road, Ron's heart surged with a sense of familiarity. Since he was sensible, he grew up in this town and never stepped out of the town. As for some of the things in the outside world, many of them were heard from the townspeople. Maple Leaf Town can be regarded as Ron's home. A fat figure quickly ran toward Ron, looking flustered. Ron took a closer look. It turned out to be Aunt Susan. She was very good to Ron and Grandpa Zachary. She often gave them some food that they could not finish. The tattered clothes that Ron was wearing now were also given by her. Ron often went to her house to help her with some work, so they were very familiar with each other. Aunt Susan looked at Ron and hurriedly shouted, "Ron, not good, your grandfather has an accident." Ah? Ron's eyes suddenly widened. Could it be? Ron's heart had a bad premonition. Grandpa's health has always been poor, especially since autumn. He coughs obviously more and sometimes he can't sleep all night. Ron's first thought was that his grandfather's condition had worsened. He hastily greeted Aunt Susan and hurriedly ran in the direction of his home. On the stone bridge of Maple Leaf Town, several luxuriously dressed youths were surrounding a grizzled-haired old man. They were constantly heckling. Nearby were the townspeople of Maple Leaf Town. Their faces were full of anger, but no one dared to step forward to stop them. At a glance, one could tell that those youths were aristocrats from their clothes, demeanor, and temperament. One of them was known to the townspeople. It was Chitterley from the Naka Manor, not far from Maple Leaf Town. Young master, there were two others. One was wearing blue clothes, with golden hair and an arrogant demeanor. The other one was wearing black clothes, with dark brown hair, an aquiline nose, and a somewhat gloomy smile. They were young Master Chitterley's friends, and seemed to be aristocrats. There were also several servants standing beside them. "Young masters, I was wrong. I won't dare in the future." Ron's grandfather, Zachary, begged for mercy. His grizzled white head continuously hit the ground. He had only seen the luxuriously dressed young masters and knew that they were the children of rich families. Therefore, he had the courage to go forward and beg. But he hadn't thought that he would accidentally dirty one of their clothes. Actually, those few aristocratic youths were idle and bored. They came to Maple Leaf Town to stroll around and see if they could find some fun. They didn't think that they would run into someone who didn't have eyes. It just so happened that someone had delivered themselves to their door to entertain them. "Old man, do you know how much my clothes cost?" "At least 7 gold coins. "You old thing, you can't even afford a button of mine. Now that you've dirted it, what do you say we do?" the blue-clothed youth fiercely said. The blue-clothed youth was called Jordan. He was the successor of the Holy Roman Empire's Salter family and also Chitterley's cousin. He had come to visit his uncle on his mother's orders. Today, he had followed Chitterley to stroll around and came to Maple Leaf Town because he had nothing better to do. Seeing the dirty black handprints on his luxurious clothes, Jordan only felt a wave of disgust. As a noble, he had been unclean since he was young. Besides feeling disgusted, he also felt that his noble dignity had been challenged. He could only vent his anger on the pitiful old man in front of him. Hee, Cousin Jordan, why are you saying so much nonsense? Look at this lowly commoner. He's penniless and probably can't afford the compensation. Chitterly jeered from the side. The sinister-looking youth at the side said with a sinister smile, "Poor little Jordan, it looks like you'll definitely suffer a loss." As a noble, Jordan was proud and arrogant. He sneered and drew his sword with a swish. "Chitterly, you're right. Since you don't have the money to pay, then don't blame me for being impolite. Did you know? Everyone has to pay the price for their actions. You're no exception," Jordan said with a sinister smile. Jordan's long sword flashed with a demonic blue light and emitted a bone-piercing chill. One could tell at a glance that it wasn't an ordinary item. That sword kept pointing at Zachary's body. Zachary trembled in fear while the group of youths watched and laughed. Chitterly glanced at the long sword in Jordan's hand and couldn't move his eyes away. With an envious expression, he smiled and said, "Cousin Jordan, how about this? You kill this lowly commoner and vent your anger. He can't afford the compensation anyway." Hee, right. Mackinch clapped and laughed. "Okay." Jordan smiled and raised the sword in his hand, ready to chop. "No, young master, spare my life." Zachary was terrified and fell to the ground. His lame legs kicked powerlessly and the four-wheeled flatbed underneath him flipped over. His eyes were filled with fear. Ha! A few of the noble youths laughed crazily. Their laughter was filled with pride as they looked at the angry townsfolk who didn't dare to step forward. "Just kill him. He's a lowly commoner anyway. His death isn't worth pitying," Chitterly said agitatedly. He stuck out his tongue and licked his lip. His eyes flashed with a cruel light. He was looking forward to seeing the blood splatter. "Kill, humph." Seeing the old man's frightened and helpless gaze, Jordan's eyes flashed with a trace of hesitation. As a noble, killing a commoner wasn't a big deal. At worst, he could settle it with some money. Killing people like beggars wasn't a big deal. However, although Jordan wasn't afraid of trouble, he was still a 16 or 17-year-old youth. He couldn't bear to kill someone for no reason. Jordan raised his sword but hesitated whether or not he should chop down. What? He wants to kill someone? No way. He wants to do such a small thing. One of the townsfolk was shocked and angry. "Humph, what can't those nobles do?" Another townsfolk was indignant. "If only I were a noble. Look at how impressive he is." Some of the townsfolk had envious gazes. The townsfolk started to discuss. A few strong young men couldn't stand it anymore and wanted to stand up to stop them. However, they were stopped by some of the older townsfolk. "Don't go. They're all impulsive, noble children. They're capable of doing anything." Seeing that the young man still wanted to show off, the old man added, "Those young masters are at least beginner swordsmen. You're no match for them at all." Hearing this, many people hesitated and began to shrink back. These nobles had the right to receive education since birth. They learned swordsmanship, and even magic. Judging from the strength of these young men, the townsfolk of Maple Leaf Town had no ability to stop them from doing anything. 16 or 17 years old was the age of impulsiveness. Coupled with the protection of nobles and the protection of strength, they could do whatever they wanted. In short, if they killed you, there was no way to get justice. Who would be so stupid as to rush to their deaths? How about it, Jordan? Jordan, you don't dare to do it? Seeing that Jordan was hesitating, Mackinch mocked. When did my little Jordan become so timid? If you don't dare, let me do it. My Shurgene family isn't afraid of this little trouble. Who are you saying doesn't dare? Jordan was stung by Mackinch's words. He gritted his teeth. In that case, I'll kill him for you to see. I'll prove that I, Jordan, am not a coward. That old beggar is finished. Some of the townsfolk turned their heads and closed their eyes. They couldn't bear to watch this scene. When Ron ran to the bridge in Maple Leaf Town, he found that things were different from what he thought. It turned out that his grandfather wasn't sick. Ron saw his grandfather on the ground. The young man's face was full of murderous intent. His eyes turned red. "Don't hurt my grandfather!" The skinny Ron suddenly rushed out from the side. He didn't know where the strength came from, but he pushed the young man in blue, Jordan, and staggered. Jordan was unprepared. He was pushed back a few steps and fell to the ground. "Grandpa, what's wrong with you?" Ron didn't care about the other noble young masters. He first helped his grandfather up. "Ron, I'm fine." Zachary was a little frightened, but fortunately there was nothing serious. Seeing that the old beggar had escaped, the townsfolk were relieved. At the same time, they were nervous. Ron had offended the noble young master. What should they do? "Jordan, are you okay?" Mackinch helped him up and pretended to be concerned. "Why are you so careless?" "Go away." Jordan was pushed by Ron and fell. He made a fool of himself in front of everyone. He stood up angrily and gritted his teeth. "Beat him. Beat him to death." When the lackeys received the order, they immediately rushed forward and punched and kicked Ron. Bang, bang, bang. Jordan lost face. He didn't care about his image, and also rushed up to beat him. As his cousin and friend, he naturally went up to help. Countless punches and kicks fell on Ron's body like raindrops. Ron gritted his teeth and didn't make a sound. He protected his grandfather and let them beat him to their heart's content. In any case, it wasn't the first time he was beaten. young master, please spare Ron. He is still a child, he is still young." Zachary shakily climbed up with his hands and feet to protect his grandson Ron. Ouch! At this time, Chitterly kicked out and coincidentally kicked Ron's bones, causing him to feel pain instead. "Hey, although this kid is thin, his bones are very hard." Chitterly felt the pain and his face turned malevolent. Evil grew from his guts as he kicked Ron with all his might. "Die for me!" This kick didn't hit Ron, but it accurately kicked Zachary's chest. Gotcha! The crisp sound of bones breaking was heard. Ron was stunned. Everyone was stunned. Let alone Zachary, even an ordinary strong young man wouldn't be able to withstand this kick. Plop, plop, Zachary powerlessly fell to the ground and fainted. His face was like gold paper and his mouth overflowed with black blood. "Grandfather!" Ron didn't care about the pain in his body. With a sorrowful cry, he crazily threw himself at Zachary. Grandfather, what happened to you?" More and more blood flowed from Zachary's mouth. The black blood gradually turned red and his breathing became weaker. "Grandfather, don't scare me." Ron saw this and was so anxious that he was about to cry. He was in a hurry. The townspeople's eyes changed from panic to anger. They helplessly watched a fresh life die in the hands of a few ignorant aristocratic youngsters. The simple residents of Maple Leaf Town couldn't hold back. Chitterly saw that he had caused trouble. He looked at the surrounding crowd and helplessly spread out his hands. "This has nothing to do with me. He ran into me himself. Let's go." Seeing the current situation, Jordan didn't want to cause trouble and pulled Chitterly. Mackintosh didn't say anything and just nodded. Chapter 4. The townspeople of Maple Leaf Town also left with sympathetic gazes. They could only express sympathy for Ron's experience. These townspeople had neither the ability nor the strength to prevent this tragedy from happening. Ron wiped away his tears and slowly glanced at these townspeople. Without saying a word, he helped Grandpa Zachary's body onto the four-wheeled flatbed cart and slowly dragged him back to his dilapidated home. Search for the latest updates here. Under the bridge of Maple Leaf Town, there was a simple shack. Ron and Grandpa Zachary had lived here for more than 10 years. The two sides of the shack were illuminated, but it couldn't block the cold wind from outside. Because it was close to the river, the temperature at night was lower than usual. This was their home. Ron had lived here for more than 10 years. Ron carefully helped Zachary from the flatbed cart to a simple bed made of a few tattered quilts. Zachary was startled. He coughed a few times and weakly opened his turbid eyes. When he saw Ron, the corners of his mouth revealed a trace of a smile. Grandpa! Looking at his grandfather's miserable state, Ron's tears flowed down with a swish sound. Looking at Ron, Zachary forced a smile. Ron! Just as he spoke, blood flowed down from the corners of his mouth. Grandpa, you're bleeding a lot! Ron cried. He stretched out his arm and hurriedly wiped the blood from the corners of his grandfather's mouth. In this situation, he didn't know what to do at all. After wiping the blood with great difficulty, Ron carefully asked, Grandpa, do you want to drink some water? Or eat something? The naive Ron thought that his grandfather would get better as long as he drank some water and ate something. However, this was all he could do now. Zachary shook his head. He stretched out a hand and gently stroked Ron's little face. He smiled with difficulty and said, Ron, my good child, let Grandpa take a good look at you. I'm afraid Grandpa can't accompany you in the future. No, Grandpa. Ron was shocked. He put his grandfather's hand on his face and anxiously said, Grandpa, you won't die. You will get better. No, Zachary gently shook his head with a trace of a smile. Grandpa knows his body, even if today's matter Grandpa can't live for long. No, yes, no, Grandpa. Ron's tears flowed again. Ron, Grandpa knows your dream is to become a great magician. Zachary's hand gently stroked Ron's hair. Unfortunately, Grandpa has no ability to help you realize your wish. Grandpa. Ron was already choked with sobs. Ron, don't cry, life and death is fate, we can't resist it. Zachary smiled sadly. Let's not talk about this. Ron, Grandpa, what I'm about to say, you have to listen carefully. Zachary put on an unprecedentedly serious expression. He was very anxious. There were some things that he had to tell Ron. Ron looked up with teary eyes. Grandpa, what do you say? Open the cupboard. The cupboard in the corner of the room was the only intact thing in Ron's house. Usually, his grandfather didn't allow him to touch it. Ron didn't dare to neglect. He wiped his tears and opened the cupboard. Open the third compartment. Ron did as he was told. After opening the cupboard, he saw a few children's clothes folded neatly. Ron doubtfully picked them up and took a closer look. The material was extremely noble. He didn't know which aristocrat used it to wrap babies. Inside the clothes, there's something, take it out. Zachary's voice was much lower and he seemed to be in a hurry. He didn't have much time left. Ron took out a necklace from the clothes. The necklace was made of pure gold. Below the necklace there was a pendant. The pendant was in the shape of a hexagram. In the middle of the pendant was a gem. Even in the dark night it shone with a faint light. Grandpa, is this the thing? Ron took the necklace. Yes, this is it. Ron was puzzled. He took the necklace and looked left and right. He asked, What is this? Ron, this is related to your origin. This necklace is the token. Zachary said weakly. Ron opened his mouth in surprise. Grandpa, you said, my origin, aren't my parents mercenaries? Didn't they die while completing a mission? Zachary's mouth showed a trace of a smile. Silly child. I made this up to deceive you. Aren't my parents mercenaries? Ron took a while to recover from the shock. He hurriedly asked, Then Grandpa, who are my biological parents? I don't know. Zachary sighed. Ron, do you know why I've been staying here all these years? Ron shook his head. Zachary weakly raised his hand and pointed to the place by the river. That year I picked you up here. I don't know which parents were so cruel to leave you here when you were only 1 year old, Zachary said with a smile. At that time it was winter. When I found you, you almost fainted from hunger. You didn't even have the strength to cry. At that time, you were wrapped in a few pieces of clothes, and that necklace. Zachary smiled with difficulty. He coughed a few times and blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Ron hurriedly reached out to wipe it. Zachary continued, At that time I was just a beggar. I didn't have the ability to raise you. I begged Aunt Susan, for some milk, to raise you. Ron nodded with tears in his eyes. He thought of that fat Aunt Susan. She was his wet nurse. No wonder she had been so good to him. I don't know your name, so I gave you the name Ron. Zachary continued, but I know that your family must be aristocratic. I can tell from those children's clothes and that necklace. You also know that in my condition, I don't have the ability to help you find your parents. So all these years, I have been waiting here, waiting for them to come back to find you, Zachary said with a bitter smile. Ron nodded with tears in his eyes. Grandpa was lame. It was difficult for him to even walk, let alone find people. At this time, Zachary's eyes began to lose their luster and his breathing became rapid. It was obvious that he had reached the end of his life. Grandpa can't wait with you anymore, Anne. Ron, it's meaningless for you to wait here. Leave here to find out your origin. Whether you can find your parents or not depends on yourself, Grandpa. I don't want anything. I only want you, I only want you. Grandpa. Ron didn't want to listen anymore. Tears flowed down his cheek. He kissed his grandfather's thin palm. He thought that as long as his grandfather could get better, he was willing to pay any price. Don't leave me, Zachary finally smiled. Ron, live well. Don't avenge me. Take care of yourself. The poor old man, at the last moment, was still thinking about Ron, worried that he would lose his life for revenge. No, Grandpa. They are the murderers who killed you. I will kill them to avenge you. When Ron heard this, his eyes suddenly turned red and he almost roared. But Zachary couldn't hear him anymore. His legs collapsed and he breathed his last. Grandpa, in the quiet Maple Leaf town, Ron's heart-wrenching cries could be heard. Ron, after crying for a long time, Ron heard a familiar voice. He looked over and saw a fat figure standing outside the door. It was Aunt Susan. She was looking at him with concern. Aunt Susan. Ron wiped his tears and stood up. Grandpa is gone. I guessed it. The fat Aunt Susan sighed. In fact, your grandfather's health has always been poor. He also felt that he didn't know when he would. He asked me not to tell you. Ron, you have to take it easy. I know, Aunt Susan. Ron shook his head. Aunt Susan sighed again. She pursed her lips and said hesitantly, Ron, one of those people today is the young master of the Naka Manor in Maple Leaf Town. The other two are probably not simple. Ron, I think, Aunt Susan. I want to be alone. Ron understood what Aunt Susan meant. She didn't want him to lose his life for revenge. But Ron didn't listen and interrupted her rudely. Susan's lips moved and she sighed. She said, Well, that's a pornographic novel. Well, calm down. Those people are not people that we can afford to offend. Aunt Susan nagged and turned to leave. At this time, Ron stopped her again. Aunt Susan, can you do me a favor? Susan turned around and smiled. Tell me, what else can I help you with, Ron? Can you give me a mat? I want to bury Grandpa. Ron bit his lips and said, Okay. Aunt Susan nodded heavily and turned to leave. Ron felt very guilty. Grandpa had suffered a lifetime of hardship. When he died, he didn't even have a mat to wrap his body. It was all because he was poor. In Maple Leaf Town, under the cold moonlight, a small grave was piled up in the yellow soil. Grandpa Zaley's body was buried in the soil little by little. Buried together with him was a small four-wheeled flatbed cart. This was Zaley's last relic. Grandpa's grave was piled up by Ron with his own hands. He didn't use any tools. At this moment, his hand was cut open and dripping with blood, but he still didn't feel it. Grandpa, this is the wine that you have been treasuring and unwilling to drink. Today, Ron will give it to you. Ron opened a wine bottle and gently poured the wine on the ground. This was the lowest quality wine, but for Zaley it was the most precious wine. He was reluctant to drink it. At this time, Ron was immersed in deep memories. In the cold wind, he muttered to himself. Grandpa, do you still remember? When we were young, you would leave the best food for me, and you would eat the worst food. Grandpa, at that time, snowflakes as big as goose feathers were floating in the sky, and the wind that blew could freeze people to death. I was so hungry that I couldn't stop crying. It was you who gave me the last piece of black bread. Ron looked at the sky. In the sky, the stars seemed to form Grandpa Zaley's face, looking at him kindly. It was as if he was saying to him, Ron, you have to become a magician and let Grandpa bask in your glory. At that time, Grandpa can proudly tell others that I have a magician grandson. My little magician, where are you going? Come back for dinner. Chapter 5. Although it was night, Manor Naka, not far from Maple Leaf Town, was still brightly lit, as if it was a festival. Manor Naka was not so much a manor as a castle. Such strong walls benefited from the continuous reinforcement of the manor's owners. It looked like a fortress. Even if bandits came, they would not be able to easily take it down. Search for the latest updates here. Manor Naka itself also had many guards, which was one of the reasons why Manor Naka was so famous that no one dared to provoke it. Young Master, you're back? Seeing young Master Chitley, the head butler of Manor Naka came out to greet him. Chitley nodded. Where's my father? Young Master, Master is waiting for you in the study, the head butler said. Passing through the gloomy aisle, Chitley came to his father's study, knocked on the door and called out, Father, come in. There were not many words in reply, but to Chitley, it had an irresistible majesty. A burly man was sitting at the table in the study. He was holding a sword in one hand and a rag in the other. He was gently wiping it back and forth with an extremely serious expression. He looked at the sword with tender eyes, as if he was looking at his wife. He was the owner of Manor Naka, Gerard. When he saw his son come in, he said without turning his head, Sit down. Chitley sat down nervously. Since he was young, he had been most afraid of his father. Your cousin and young Master Mackintosh have already gone to bed, right? Gerard asked. Yes, father, Chitley replied. Gerard turned around and glanced at his son. He sheathed the sword in his hand and placed the rag on the table. You have to entertain your cousin Jordan and young Master Mackintosh well. Don't neglect them. When he said this, Gerard's face had already changed into a humble expression. To Gerard, the arrival of Jordan and Mackintosh was a great honor to Manor Naka. Usually, nobles like Jordan could not be invited even if they wanted to, so they were giving his family face by coming. Yes, father, Chitley answered honestly. Did they have a good time here today? Gerald smiled and asked, You were not in the manor all day. Where did you go? We went to Maple Leaf Town. Kittery panicked, not knowing if he should mention the matter of this afternoon. Well, Maple Leaf Town. Not bad. Autumn is coming. The maple leaves there are very beautiful. Well, as long as they have fun. Gerald didn't feel anything strange. He smiled and asked, How are you getting along with them? Fortunately, Cousin Jordan treats me well, Chitley said. That's good. Gerald read the pornographic novel with satisfaction. He nodded. To be able to form a relationship with Jordan meant that Chitley had done a good job. You are of the same age, so you should have many common topics to talk about. Seeing that his father's expression was normal, Chitley's tensed heart relaxed. He knew that his father was satisfied with his performance and couldn't help but have the idea of asking for a reward. He smiled and said, Father, I'll be 15 years old this month. What do you think? Nobody knows a son better than his father. Even before Chitley finished speaking, Gerald had already understood his meaning. He smiled and said, What do you want? There's a chance? Chitley's eyebrows jumped. He was secretly delighted. Usually, his father wasn't so easy to talk to. He took a step forward and said boldly, Father, I want a sword. He paused. Well, a sword like Cousin Jordan's will do. Gerald didn't feel anything when he heard the first half of Chitley's sentence. But when he heard the second half, He was so scared that he almost slipped. What? You want a sword like Cousin Jordan's? Yes. Chitley still didn't realize that there was a problem with his condition. In his opinion, it was only a sword and wasn't a big deal. Gerald smiled bitterly. Dear Chitley, it's not that I don't want to buy you such a sword, but I simply can't afford it. Do you know how much Cousin Jordan's sword costs? How much? Chitley was still confused. But he knew that it must be expensive. Gerald smiled bitterly and held out 3 fingers. 300 gold coins? Chitley asked. Gerald shook his head. 3,000 gold coins? Gerald still shook his head and said, Your Cousin Jordan's sword is called Cold Song. It's a low-grade dark gold equipment. Its price is over 30,000 gold coins. 30,000? Chitley was shocked by this number. Just this sword alone is worth 30,000? Gerald nodded solemnly. 30,000 is a basic number. It refers to the lowest grade of attribute. If it's a high-grade attribute, just the core alone would be worth 150,000. The price of a dark gold equipment would definitely double. It would be worth at least 300,000. If it were to be auctioned, it would probably be even higher. What is dark gold? High-grade attribute? Chitley still didn't understand. You don't know? Gerald frowned and said with dissatisfaction. Chitley, I usually tell you to read more books but you don't listen. Now you don't understand anything. Humph, ignorant and incompetent. After teaching Chitley a lesson, Gerald still gave him an explanation. The level of the weapons we commonly use can be upgraded. For example, the swords we normally use have not been upgraded. They are ordinary weapons. The process of upgrading is called enchantment. A sword that has been enchanted will have a magical attribute. It will be easier to use and more powerful. Its attack power will also increase. The enchantment of a weapon requires a core. After a successful upgrade, the first grade is azure, the second is aquamarine, the third is gold, and the fourth is dark gold. Your cousin's sword is dark gold at the 4th grade. Then what's with the grade and attribute? Chitley still didn't understand. As for the grade and attribute, your cousin is currently an intermediate swordsman. He can only use low-grade weapons. The highest grade of a low-grade weapon is dark gold. As for the attribute, I don't know. If it's a high-grade attribute, then it would be the best among low-grade weapons. So the price of 300,000 gold coins isn't too high. Chitley thought for a moment and asked, Why is the price difference between a weapon with a high-grade attribute and a low-grade attribute so great? Gerald revealed a smile. It's related to the price of essence cores. Think about it, a LV4 essence core is 1,000 gold coins, a LV5 essence core is 2,000 gold coins, a LV6 essence core is 5,000 gold coins. Our family can't afford a LV6 essence core. He paused for a moment before continuing. Moreover, the enchantment of a weapon isn't always smooth sailing. The probability of failure is very high. If you fail once, the core will be gone. This is equivalent to gambling. The higher the grade of the weapon, the higher the probability of failure. Many people have gone bankrupt in order to enchant their weapons, and upgrading a low-grade white-grade weapon to dark gold grade would normally require 30 cores. Just the core alone would cost 150,000 gold coins. If it were to be upgraded to dark gold grade, the price would double, which is 300,000 gold coins. Chitley stuck out his tongue. 300,000 gold coins for a sword, this price is too exaggerated. He knew that his manor's annual income was only a few thousand gold coins, so 300,000 gold coins for a sword was simply an unrealistic fantasy. It's good that you know. It's not that I, as your father, don't want to buy it for you, it's that I simply can't afford it. Gerald smiled. The Salter family can't be compared to us. Their family is one of the top families in the Holy Roman Empire. If not for your aunt marrying the head of the family, how could our Naka Manor have the glory it has today? Chitley nodded. He knew that his family was nothing more than a country bumpkin, while his cousin and his friend, Mackinch, were the true aristocrats. His family wasn't even fit to carry their shoes. Jordan was his aunt's son. If not for this relationship, how could young Master Jordan come to a place like Naka Manor with his status? Jordan might become the successor of the Salter family. If you get along well with him, you'll benefit in the future. Gerald smiled. Yes, father. Chitley nodded. I will. I'll give this sword to you. Gerald thought for a moment before handing the sword he had just wiped to Chitley. This sword belongs to the lower ranks of the Azure Grade Longsword. It has inferior attributes and is worth at least 5,000 to 6,000 gold coins. I'll give it to you. Chitley was overjoyed and happily reached out to receive it. After thanking him, he took the sword and left his father's study. With this sword, he could show it off in front of his cousin and his friend tomorrow. Although this action seemed ridiculous, young Master Chitley still wanted to save face. Gerald's study returned to its tranquility. After a while, dong dong dong. Knocks sounded on the door again. Come in. The one who came in was the Naka Manor's chief steward. Master, you're looking for me? Gerald's eyes narrowed into a line as he asked the chief steward, what happened when Chitley went to Maple Leaf Town today? Chitley's panicked expression couldn't be hidden from him. Since childhood, Gerald was most familiar with his son. Sure enough, the chief steward bowed deeply and said, Yes, master. Something did happen to the young master and the others in Maple Leaf Town today. He then narrated the events of this afternoon in full detail. The chief steward was also puzzled. This was only a small matter for the Naka Manor, so he could handle it. He also believed that he could handle it well. Wasn't it just a beggar? He didn't expect the master to personally get involved. Oh, so it turned out that he accidentally killed an old beggar. Gerald didn't think much of it. It's just a lowly commoner. So what if he's killed? It's no big deal. If it was a townsfolk, it would be troublesome. For the townsfolk's benefit, they might have to pay some money. If it was just a penniless beggar, then it would save a lot of trouble. They wouldn't even have to pay any money. But Chitley is really too useless. He's done evil things, but he forgot to clean up his mess. Gerald coldly snorted and said in dissatisfaction, Call Chitley here. Chitley came to his father's study again. When he saw the chief steward, he knew that something bad had happened. His father must have known about today's event. Gerald asked with a livid face, Chitley, do you know your mistake? Chitley looked flustered. It's none of my business. He bumped into me himself. I'm not talking about you. Gerald's eyes stared at Chitley. Why didn't you kill that little bastard? There were a lot of townsfolk watching that day. It wasn't that Chitley hadn't thought about this, but there were so many people that day that he couldn't do it. So what if there were a lot of townsfolk? It's just killing a little beggar. Gerald was extremely dissatisfied with him. Father, since you said it was just a little beggar, is there a need to be so serious? It feels like we're afraid of him, Chitley said cautiously. Gerald frowned, took a breath and asked, Chitley, do you know about mountain ants? Mountain ants? Chitley had a question mark in his mind. He didn't know what his father was referring to. Yes, it's that kind of mountain ant. It's very big. Gerald revealed a meaningful smile. Although the mountain ant is small, it's still very painful to be bitten by it, isn't it? Late at night, in Manor Naka, after almost everyone had fallen asleep, the door slowly opened. A few fast horses rushed out of the manor and ran straight in the direction of Maple Leaf Town. The light in Gerald's study in Manor Naka was still on. Gerald stood in front of the window, watching the fast horses go away with a cruel smile in his eyes. Chapter 6. The clear night sky was dotted with stars, illuminating the tranquil Maple Leaf Town. Beside the stone bridge, a thin figure was kneeling in front of the grave. Ron's tears had already flowed out. He stood up abruptly. The week never needed tears. Search the latest updates are all here. Thinking of those arrogant and domineering aristocratic young masters, Ron's anger almost broke through the sky. He could not wait to tear them into pieces. There was a voice in his heart that kept shouting, "Revenge, I want revenge. I want revenge for Grandpa." However, Ron was quickly discouraged. The word revenge was easy to say, but it was not so easy to do. Strength, without strength, not to mention Chitley, any housekeeper or servant of Manor Naka could beat him to a pulp. Ron dejectedly hung his head. Without strength, how could he take revenge? Sigh, if only I were a magician, Ron said self-deprecatingly. Then I could take revenge for Grandpa. It can be imagined that a 15-year-old child, who was also a homeless child, said that it was impossible for him to take revenge. At this time, except for anger and self-comfort, Ron had nothing. Tomorrow I'll go to the Maple Forest Ancient Road to try my luck, even if there is a glimmer of hope. Ron sighed. At present, he could only do this. If only I met a magician. At this time, a sudden voice sounded in Ron's ear. Do you have to become a magician to take revenge? In this quiet night, the sudden voice made people feel creepy, startling Ron. Who's here? Ron looked around but did not find a single person. His heart was even more flustered. Child, you don't have to be afraid, I'm here. After saying this, a cloud of black gas appeared in front of Ron's eyes. The black gas gradually grew bigger and a figure gradually emerged. Ron was frightened by the sudden appearance of the figure. He kept retreating and stumbled to the ground. The old man who appeared in front of Ron had a pale complexion. He was wearing a black magic robe, and his body was surrounded by wisps of black gas. His eyes were emitting a dark green light, like a wolf in the wild. In the silent night, he seemed a little eerie and terrifying. Child, you don't have to be afraid. I don't mean any harm. The black shadow grinned, revealing a kind smile, but in Ron's eyes, it was even more terrifying than an evil spirit. You? Who are you? Ron asked in horror. My name is Homelin, Grand Magus Necromancer Homelin, the old man said with a smile. Child, what is your name? My name is Ron. Seeing Homelin being so kind, Ron calmed down and asked, You? Why are you here? I'm a soul body. After a person dies, they turn into a soul and stay there. Homelin smiled and pointed at the ring on Ron's hand. I was awakened by your blood, so I ran out. Ring? Ron looked at the unremarkable ring in his hand, puzzled. This was a cheap item that Grandpa Zari bought from a wandering merchant on his 10th birthday. It only cost a few copper coins. On the outside, this ring didn't have any decorations. It was just a small black iron ring. In terms of appearance, the cheapest ring was much better looking than it. Because Ron's blood flowed onto the ring, it was activated. Homelin had actually been out for a while. He had been observing Ron. When he knew that Ron wanted to become a mage, he couldn't help but jump out. Don't worry, Ron. I'm a soul body. I don't have the strength nor the ability to hurt you. Homelin seemed to feel the fear in Ron's heart, so he took the initiative to say. He smiled again and continued to ask, Ron, can you tell me where this place is? Maple Leaf Town, Ron replied. Maple Leaf Town? Homelin frowned. This was a name that he had never heard before. Where is this place? Maple Leaf Town is in the Holy Roman Empire. Ron saw that he didn't understand and added another sentence. Holy Roman Empire? Homelin's heart skipped a beat. This was another country's name that he didn't know. Homelin frowned. He thought for a moment and asked, Ron, do you know about the Scourge Church? Scourge Church? This time it was Ron's turn to be at a loss. What is the Scourge Church? What's going on? You don't even know about the Scourge Church? How is that possible? Homelin was shocked and lost his voice. Isn't this the continent of Omros? The continent of Omros? I've never heard of it. Ron shook his huge little head. I only know that this is the continent of Noah. The continent of Noah? What's going on? Homelin's breathing quickened. Could it be that I'm in another plane? What happened after I died? His soul slept in the ring. No matter how long it was, Homelin felt that it was only a moment. He didn't know what had happened. In fact, 100,000 years had passed since Homelin died. At this time, Ron also didn't know that in the mythical story that the old man in Maple Leaf Town told, the continent that was punished and abandoned by the gods was called Omros. At this time, Ron had completely let down his guard against Homelin. He got up and said, "Grandpa Homelin, why are you hiding in this ring?" Thinking of the past, Homelin's lips twitched fiercely. He would never forget that his apprentice had tricked him into drinking the potion made from the Blue Beauty flower. The potion made from this flower could make people temporarily lose their strength, and then kill him with a knife. Fortunately, his soul was strong enough to abandon his body and hide in the ring. Otherwise, even his soul would have been destroyed. Homelin didn't want to talk about the sad past. Instead, he changed the topic and said, "Ron, I just heard that you want to become a magician. What's going on?" Looking at Homelin, Ron only felt a sense of familiarity. It was not because of anything else but because Homelin looked too much like Grandpa Zeri. They were both so amiable and kind. At first, Ron thought that Grandpa Zeri had come back to life. Ron's mind was full of grievances, and he just wanted to find someone to talk to. He told Homelin everything that had happened today. When he got emotional, he couldn't help but cry. "So that's how it is." Homelin nodded. After listening to Ron's story, he sympathized with Ron's experience. His eyes revealed a trace of killing intent. "Such a person should be killed," he paused and said, "but Ron, if you want to avenge your grandfather, you need strength. Without strength, there will only be endless resentment and blame left. This is simply useless." Homelin had seen countless people. He could see at a glance that Ron was poor. Revenge was as difficult as ascending to heaven for him. "So I really want to become a magician," Ron said with a firm look. "As long as I become a magician, I will be able to avenge my grandfather," Homelin chuckled. "Ron, if you want to avenge your grandfather, you don't have to become a magician." Ron understood the meaning behind those words. He carefully sized up Homelin and said with a hint of joy, "Grandpa Homelin, could it be that you're a magician? Are you wearing a magician's robe?" He mistook Homelin's necromancer's robe for a magician's robe. Homelin nodded with a smile. "That's right, but I'm not a mage. I'm a Grand Magus Necromancer, Homelin. I belong to the Calamity Church, the Temple of the Undead." Ron was dumbfounded when he heard this. "What? You are not a magician?" "Although I am not a magician, I am a necromancer." "Ah!" Ron's eyes gradually dimmed. The glimmer of hope that had just been ignited in his heart was mercilessly extinguished. Looking at Ron's expression, Homelin was somewhat dissatisfied with a pornographic novel. He stared at him with his strange eyes. "What? Are you looking down on me, a necromancer? Let me tell you, when I was a necromancer, I don't know how many magicians died at my hands. At that time, I don't even know where you were." Ron tilted his head and asked, "Grandpa Homelin, could it be that you, a necromancer, are more powerful than a magician?" "Of course." Homelin was so angry that he blew his beard and glared. The thing he hated the most was to see others insult his necromancy magic. If not for the fact that he was still a soul body, he would have already slapped him. "More powerful than a fire magician?" Ron continued to ask. "Of course," Homelin replied proudly. "More powerful than an earth magician?" "Of course." "More powerful than a water magician?" "Of course," bragging. Ron heard this and finally concluded. "You." Homelin was almost angered to death. He pointed his finger at Ron, trembling and unable to speak. His beard was moving because of his anger. Seeing the stubborn Ron, Homelin couldn't help but admit defeat. What was this called? The ignorant were fearless. He thought for a while, rolled his eyes, and softened his tone. Ron, how about this? If you are willing to learn necromancy magic from me, I will consider teaching you. I won't learn unless it's powerful magic. Ron still shook his head and said, If you can't take revenge after learning it, it's useless. If the people of Omros in the past heard this, their jaws would probably drop. The necromancer Grand Magician Homelin was personally accepting a disciple. Half of the continent would be in an uproar. Just the queue alone would probably stretch to 10th Street. Now, he was actually humbly accepting a disciple, and the other party actually didn't accept. Ah! Homelin was stunned and helplessly shook his head. Then Ron, what do you want to learn? I want to learn magic. It's best if it's fire magic. Ron thought for a while and said excitedly, Water, earth, whatever works too. As Ron spoke, he began to imitate the scene of the female magician casting a spell that he had seen before. Fire hidden in the depths of hell, accept my call, burn my enemies. Go, fireball! It had to be said that Ron's movements were extremely precise. It looked like he had practiced many times, but other than the movements, not a single spark appeared. Grandpa Homelin, do you know how to do this? I don't know. Homelin felt that he had been completely defeated. He didn't care about this trashy fireball at all. He could casually use a bone spur to destroy the opponent, but then again, Homelin really didn't know how to use fireball. However, Homelin had no choice. Because Ron's blood had dripped onto the ring, he felt that his soul had already connected with Ron's. If he wanted to regain his body, he would have to rely on Ron. Grandpa Homelin, do you have any friends who are magicians? Can you let him teach me? Ron raised his smiling face and wanted to reach out to shake Homelin's hand. He didn't expect to grab onto empty air, only then did he remember that the other party was a soul body. Magician? Homelin rolled his eyes at him in annoyance. He thought to himself, I don't know what King continent this is, and I'm still a soul body. How the hell would I know a magician? Homelin took a deep breath and calmed his agitated emotions. He softened his tone and was about to further coax Ron into learning necromancy magic when his face suddenly changed and his voice trembled. Chapter 7. Enemy? I don't have any? The naive Ron was still confused. He never thought that he would provoke an enemy. Homelin's face was solemn. That's right, they are coming for you. Go quickly, it will be too late. Ron's face also changed slightly. At this time, he had already heard the sound of chaotic footsteps. He looked up and saw that 3 figures had already appeared on the stone bridge. These 3 people were the killers sent out by the Nakamanor. They did not cover their faces. Perhaps they felt that there was no need at all. Is this the child? A brown-haired man dressed in ordinary clothes with 2 short swords at his waist said. His eyes looked at Ron with some disdain. Yes, it's him. He is the one the boss appointed to kill. Another middle-aged man in blue said in a deep voice. He was the butler of the Naka Manor. Isn't it a bit of a fuss to send the 3 of us to kill this child? The brown-haired man was slightly dissatisfied. According to his idea, any one person would be enough. The man in black who had been silent nodded gently. His voice was hoarse and unpleasant to hear. Do it, third brother. Hurry up and complete the task that the boss gave us, and then go back to report. The brown-haired man smiled. But since it's the boss's business, then I'll reluctantly do it. He turned to Ron and grinned. Boy, you'd better kill yourself, so as not to dirty my hands. Ron leaned back against the wall, his heart thumping non-stop. Being stared at by the brown-haired man's snake-like eyes, he truly felt a trace of panic. Run. Ron, you are not their opponent. Homelin also saw that the situation was extremely unfavorable for Ron and hurriedly reminded him. Although these 3 people were not powerful experts and only had the strength of a trainee, it was enough to deal with an ordinary 13-year-old child. Are you from the Naka Manor? Ron was not a stupid person. He had always been kind to people and never had any enemies. The only ones who could cause conflict were the people from the Naka Manor. However, as naive as Ron would never understand why these people killed his grandfather this afternoon and why they came to kill him at night. Haha, smart. The brown-haired man smiled. He didn't put a childlike Ron in his eyes and said with a smile, "Yes, we are from Manor Naka." Why? Ron's hands were shaking, and so was his voice. You just killed my grandfather this afternoon. Why do you still want to kill me? It's very simple. They want to exterminate you and not give you a chance to take revenge. Even if you're just a child, who knows what level you'll reach in the future. Hamelin was old and experienced, so he naturally knew what these people were thinking. Hee, this is the boss's idea. Kid, just accept your fate. The brown-haired man drew a short sword from his waist and approached Ron step by step. What's the point of talking so much nonsense with him? Hurry up and do it, lest something unexpected happens, the black-clothed man urged. Yes, boss. The brown-haired man didn't dare to disobey the black-clothed man's orders, so he tactfully shut his mouth. Die, kid. The brown-haired man raised the short sword in his hand and suddenly rushed toward Ron. The short sword gave off a faint cold light in the calm night. Seeing the short sword coming, Ron suddenly dodged the short sword. He also fell to the ground. Hey, good reaction. The brown-haired man grinned and raised his foot to kick. This time Ron couldn't avoid it. He was kicked directly in the arm. He only felt a strong attack. Gotcha. His arm was dislocated. Ron was in so much pain that he broke out in a cold sweat, but he resisted the urge to cry out and staggered back several steps. Help! Someone's killing me! Ron was quick-witted and shouted at the top of his voice. It's useless. It's too far from the town. The brown-haired man smiled. As a member of Manor Naka, he already knew the situation of Maple Leaf Town. After all, Manor Naka was not far from Maple Leaf Town. Ron's heart was filled with despair. How could he not know this? He only hoped to scare the other party away, but the other party was unmoved. The brown-haired man let out a strange cry and rushed toward Ron again. The short sword in his hand danced into a silver light. Ron dodged left and right. He was hit several times in a row. The place where the sword was hit was bleeding. Not good. If this goes on, Ron will be killed. Hamelin was nervous. If Ron was killed, he would fall asleep again. He didn't know where he would be when he woke up. He gritted his teeth. This is the only way. Not long after, Ron was knocked to the ground by the brown-haired man. He stepped heavily on Ron's chest and sneered. You're really flexible. However, you can't escape the fate of death. It was impossible for a 15-year-old ordinary child to beat an adult. Moreover, this adult was obviously trained. He was a trainee thief. The brown-haired man raised the short sword in his hand and was about to stab down at Ron's chest. I'm going to die, Grandpa. I can't help you take revenge. Wait for me. Ron will come to you right away. Ron's heart was filled with despair. He simply closed his eyes. Just as Ron closed his eyes and waited for death, a voice came from the bottom of his heart. Ron, open your heart and let me enter your body. Ron was shocked. It's Grandpa Hamelin. Before he could react, he felt his heart tremble as a powerful force invaded his soul. Grandpa Hamelin, you, don't talk. Watch carefully. Hamelin's voice came from the depths of his soul. Ron opened his eyes. A cold light quickly fell on his chest. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't. He wanted to move, but he couldn't. Soul pain, an unfamiliar consciousness came. The brown-haired man cried out in pain. He reached out his hand to cover his head. The short sword in his hand was thrown away. The brown-haired man's actions stunned the other two. What the hell was the third brother doing? Third brother, how are you? The black-clothed man was the first to discover that something was wrong. Third brother. The head butler also shouted. I'm fine. I don't know why it hurt. The brown-haired man seemed to have returned to normal. Why would your head suddenly hurt? The black-clothed man snorted, as if he didn't believe it. I don't know. It seems to be fine. The brown-haired man shook his head. At this time, the head butler looked like he had seen a ghost. He said with a trembling voice, What happened to him? And the black-clothed boss turned to look at the source of the sound. His gaze focused, and he saw that the target child had undergone a strange change. It was unknown when the child had stood up. His body was surrounded by bursts of black chi, and the corners of his mouth were curled up in a sneer. His eyes were emitting a faint green light as he looked at the three people and sneered. You don't have to pretend to be a ghost. It's useless. The brown-haired man was terrified. His aura also weakened a lot. Ron's body was occupied by Hamelin. He could only watch all of this. His body didn't listen to him. Ron moved and felt a sharp pain. It turned out that his left arm was dislocated. Only one arm, but it's enough. Ron pointed at the three people and said with a hoarse voice, You all have to die. Skeleton warriors, come out. Ron waved his hand. He didn't seem to recite any incantation. A black color spread out from his feet. The ground began to harden. Then, something strange happened. The hardened ground shook. Gradually, a trace of white color appeared. 3 or 4 skulls drilled out from the ground. What is this? The black-clothed man was shocked. The 4 skeleton warriors scrambled to crawl out from the ground. They were like evil spirits from hell. They stood in front of the 3 men and let out a heart-shaking roar. Pornographic novella? Seeing the 4 skeleton warriors, the 3 people were stunned. The brown-haired man looked at the skeletons in front of him. He rubbed his eyes and said to the black-clothed man, Boss, why do these things look so familiar? I seem to have seen them somewhere. We saw these things in the Roland Empire's Land City. The black-clothed man was relieved. I remember now. These are the legendary necromancers. Haha, it's actually a necromancer. Kid, you learned necromancy magic, now you know fear. Hamelin couldn't help but feel proud. His strength was certainly not limited to this. However, he was now in a soul state. To be able to do this required a lot of soul power. However, the following words were like a bucket of cold water poured on Hamelin. It made him very depressed. So it's necromancy magic. The brown-haired man couldn't help but laugh. Tisk, do you think you can resist us just because you learned this *T necromancy magic? This thing is good for scaring people, but it's rubbish in battle. What's going on? The chief butler was still confused. He was from Manor Naka and had never been to Lance City. The black-clothed man sneered and said to him, Lord Butler, if you haven't seen it, you'll be scared by this thing. In fact, this is necromancy magic, also known as the poor man's magic. Although it has the name of magic, it's actually useless. In Lance City, you can learn it for 1 gold coin, and it's guaranteed to be taught. Oh, I see. The chief butler suddenly understood. Third brother, hurry up and kill this kid. Don't waste time, the black-clothed man said. All right. The brown-haired man sneered. Kid, don't play so many tricks. It's useless no matter what you do. Come here obediently and accept your death. *CK your grandmother. No matter how well-mannered Hamelin was, he couldn't help it. He had never thought that the powerful, mysterious, and terrifying necromancy magic would be labeled as rubbish magic. These people had repeatedly challenged his bottom line. Hamelin was extremely angry. He sneered and said, Since that's the case, you can try the power of this rubbish magic. Charge! Slaughter these bastards! He waved his hand gently, and the 4 skeletal warriors pounced on the 3 men like soldiers who had received an order from their commander. Chapter 8. Don't panic, these skeletons don't have any ability to retaliate. Break it for me. The man in black was obviously experienced and knowledgeable. Go to hell. The brown-haired man sneered as he slashed out with his sword. The tip of the sword drew a silver light, and he imagined that this skeleton would be easily split into two. Search for the latest updates here. Asterisk clang. Asterisk what the brown-haired man expected didn't happen. He only saw the skeletal warrior raise the bone sword in its hand and block the slash, causing slight sparks to fly. The brown-haired man was clearly stunned. What? At this moment, the second skeletal warrior had already circled behind him and raised the bone sword in its hand, slashing down. The brown-haired man only felt the world spin around him, and then he didn't know what happened. His large head was directly cut off, and blood spurted out wildly. The two skeletal warriors cooperated well and killed him in a single strike. The man in black was stunned, and so was the butler. Even Ron, whose body was being controlled, was stunned, although none of this was caused by him. A novice thief's head and body were easily split apart by two skeletal warriors. How is this possible? The man in black's eyes suddenly widened, and his face was full of disbelief. In his impression, necromancy was only an old joke, and all its legends only existed in novels. In fact, it wasn't just him. Basically, everyone in the Noah continent believed that the so-called powerful necromancy was only a legend, and that it was actually something with no real value. Its existence was only for research purposes. The brown-haired man's corpse fell down powerlessly, and Ron saw the leader's terrified face. Impossible, absolutely impossible. How can a necromancer fight? The man in black's teeth chattered as he took a step back, his body trembling uncontrollably. His sixth sense told him that this child in front of him was extremely dangerous. You're next. Ron's hoarse voice sounded again, and he stretched out a hand, pointing at the man in black. The four skeletal warriors turned their heads in unison, their 8 eyes flashing with a faint green light as they aimed at him. With a strange cry, they fiercely attacked him. Not good, run. There was only one thought in the black-clothed man's mind, and that was to run as far away as possible, and never face this terrifying child again. Do you think you can escape? The possessed Ron smiled and made a gesture with his right hand, which could only move, as he softly spat out 2 words, Bone Prison. The man in black only felt his body sink, and he didn't know what made his body slow down. Then, his vision blurred, and a cage-like thing suddenly sprang out from the ground, and tightly trapped him, unable to move. What is this? The frightened black-clothed man had a bad feeling. He grabbed the edge of the bone prison with both hands, but he was unable to break free no matter how hard he tried. Chop it into pieces. The black-clothed man clenched his teeth, drew his sword from his waist, and fiercely slashed at the bone prison. Crack! He actually managed to cut a small hole in the prison. It can be opened. The black-clothed man was overjoyed. He was about to chop again, but he didn't know that a few black shadows had appeared around him. No. Don't. The black-clothed man already understood what he was about to face. The 4 skeletal warriors raised their swords and fiercely stabbed at him, who was trapped in the bone prison. The most terrible thing was that the black-clothed man found that he had nowhere to hide at this time. Bang! 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 4 swords pierced through him from different angles. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. Even in death, he couldn't believe that he would die at the hands of a useless necromancer. Is this still a necromancer? The black-clothed man's eyes were filled with unwillingness and a trace of puzzlement. The skeletal warriors didn't have any feelings. They only knew how to carry out the summoner's orders. They drew out their swords, and their green eyes once again aimed at the last person, the butler of the Naka Manor. The butler trembled all over. He knelt down with a plop and cried, "Sir, I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Please let me go. It's too late to admit your mistake now. I'll send you on your way." Ron, who was possessed by Hamelin, was not moved at all. The 4 skeletal warriors slowly approached the butler. When the butler knelt down, an imperceptible cold light flashed in his eyes. And this cold light happened to be caught by Hamelin, who had seen countless people. Just when the butler thought that the other party had relaxed his vigilance, he moved. A dagger flashing with cold light suddenly swung out of his sleeve and stabbed straight at Ron. Insignificant. Even if Hamelin wasn't prepared, he wouldn't fall on a small dagger. Bone shield. Hamelin silently chanted, and a shield made of bones appeared in front of Ron out of thin air. However, its process wasn't so smooth. The dagger actually pierced through the bone shield and went straight for Ron. Hamelin frowned slightly. He didn't panic and dodged to the side, avoiding the dagger. The butler stabbed empty air. Hamelin had made a mistake. Logically speaking, this shouldn't have happened. However, he couldn't be blamed. After all, this wasn't his body, and he couldn't control it as if it was his own arm. Mistakes were inevitable. When Hamelin looked again, the butler had already escaped dozens of meters away. He was running for his life. The power and terror of necromancy magic had already scared him out of his wits. Humph. You want to escape? It's not that easy. Hamelin snorted coldly. Bone spike. A ray of black light shot out from his hand and went straight for the butler like a shooting star. The butler's figure froze. Hamelin's bone spike had easily pierced him, but he endured the pain and didn't make a sound. What was a little pain to his life? The butler didn't stop for a moment and ran far away in an instant. He actually escaped. Hamelin was a little indignant, but also a little helpless. Forget it. Hamelin laughed bitterly. He couldn't control Ron's unfamiliar body to give chase. Even if he did, he wouldn't be able to catch up. It was already good enough that he could keep his life. Hamelin retracted his magic, and the skeletal warriors turned into ashes and dissipated in the wind. Although Ron's body couldn't move, his eyes were watching his every move. He didn't even dare to believe that all of this was caused by himself. We're safe now. Ron, I'll leave your body now. Hamelin smiled. At this moment, Ron felt his body go limp, as if all his strength had been sucked out. He fell to the ground weakly. Ron, who had regained control of his body, felt an intense pain coming from his left hand. That was because of the dislocation of his hand. Ron clenched his teeth and used his uninjured right hand to press on it. He twisted it forcefully, and with a "paw" sound, the dislocated bone returned to its original position. However, Ron was already in so much pain that he was breaking out in cold sweat. Hee, Ron, I didn't expect you to know how to set bones," Hamelin said with a smile. "What a strong child. This pain isn't something that an ordinary person can endure." At the same time, his figure appeared in front of Ron. It wasn't strange that Ron knew how to set bones. As a homeless child, he had to know many of the necessary skills for survival. Ron suppressed his excitement and got up in one go. He directly knelt in front of Hamelin and said sincerely, "Grandpa Hamelin, I want to be your disciple, hee." Hamelin laughed, and there was some pride in his laughter. "Ron, didn't you want to become a great mage? Why would you want to learn necromancy magic from me?" Ron was indeed shocked by Hamelin's necromancy magic. No one had a deeper understanding of the mystery and power of necromancy magic than him. He scratched his head and said embarrassedly, "Grandpa Hamelin, I was wrong. Necromancy magic is very powerful, even more powerful than mages." Hee, Ron, you're wrong on this point again. There's no such thing as the most powerful magic, only the most powerful mage. Whether or not necromancy magic is more powerful than magic depends on the person using it, Hamelin said with a smile. However, Hamelin was a little puzzled. Looking at those people just now, they obviously knew or perhaps had seen necromancy magic before, but why did they think that necromancy magic was useless magic? Why did they lose their heads out of fear after that? Homelin couldn't figure it out no matter how hard he racked his brains. Grandpa Homelin, can you teach me necromancy magic? Ron saw that Homelin was silent, and was afraid that this opportunity would fail again, so he hurriedly begged, Grandpa Homelin, can you teach me necromancy magic? Hee, of course I can, but… Homelin said with a smile. Hearing the word, but, Ron's face fell, and his face turned red as he took the initiative to say, Grandpa Homelin, I don't have money. He said this because he had met a wandering mage before. At first, the wandering mage said that he could teach him, but the moment he opened his mouth, he asked for 700 gold coins. When he heard that Ron didn't have money, he immediately turned and left. Homelin sweated again. I'm just a soul, what do I need money for? He laughed and said, Hee, Ron, I don't want money. Grandpa Homelin, then what do you want? Hearing that he didn't want money, Ron's eyes lit up with hope. I only have one condition. Homelin smiled and stretched out a finger. You join the Scourge Church, and I'll teach you necromancy magic. What's the Scourge Church? Ron casually asked. The Scourge Church isn't a thing. Homelin blurted out, but just as the words left his mouth, he realized that he had said something wrong. He immediately coughed and interrupted. Don't change the topic, are you joining or not? I'll join. As long as he joined a church, he would be able to learn such powerful necromancy magic. Even an idiot would understand this, so why wouldn't Ron join? Most importantly, only by learning necromancy magic would he have the power to avenge his grandfather. Thinking of his grandfather, Ron's heart burned with a strong fighting spirit. Then, how do I join? Ron asked. Homelin thought for a while and said helplessly, originally, joining the Scourge Church would require a lot of rules, but now that the conditions are limited, we can dispense with them. How about this, you just have to make an oath with me. I'll say one sentence, and you'll say one sentence after me. Seeing that Ron had agreed, Homelin immediately said, O great God of death, your believer Ron joins the Scourge Church today, following in your footsteps and spreading your glory. The oath was very long, but Ron still repeated it after Homelin. That's all? That's all. Then I can learn necromancy magic now? Yes. That's great. Ron jumped up in joy. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something and asked, Grandpa Homelin, can I ask you a question? Ask away. How many people are there in the Scourge Church? There used to be many people, but now there's only the two of us. Of course, I'm a soul, or more accurately, I'm just a pornographic novel. You're just a… Ron was speechless. This one-man Scourge Church was really too powerful. He rolled his eyes. Grandpa Homelin, I heard that after becoming a disciple, you have to address them respectfully. Should I call you Mentor Homelin? Hearing the words, Mentor Homelin, the corner of Homelin's mouth twitched. He thought of the disciple who had betrayed him, and his heart ached. He took a deep breath and said, No need, just call me as you are now. Oh. Ron nodded, and then said, Grandpa Homelin, should we start learning necromancy magic now? Ron was a little impatient. Chapter 9. Naka Manor. A fast horse crashed into the manor's gate, waking up the servants in the manor. Isn't that the butler? He seems to be injured. The servant quickly opened the door and helped the head butler, who was on the verge of death, into the room. Where is the master? I want to see the master. The butler looked rather miserable. There was a large bloodstain on his left shoulder blade, and the blood kept flowing down. He didn't seem to have much strength left. Needless to say, the commotion in the manor had already alerted Geralt. He got up immediately. In the front hall of the Naka Manor, Geralt saw the dispirited butler. He was shocked and asked, What happened to you? Why are you injured like this? Are you the only one? Where are the others? In Geralt's opinion, sending 3 people to assassinate a child should have been a sure thing, so he wasn't overly worried. He went straight to bed after giving his instructions. Who would have thought that the mission would fail? He felt very incredulous. Dead, they're all dead. The butler lowered his head in pain. The other two were his sworn brothers. The man in black was the eldest, the brown-haired man was the third, and he was the second. But in the end, he was the only one who survived. How could it be? Gerald was shocked. He asked in a low voice, "Who did it? Did you meet with any trouble on the way?" In his opinion, Ron's factor was directly ruled out. There must be someone else who killed him. It's that child. The butler's face flushed red. He was embarrassed to mention that he was put in such a miserable situation by a child. But he couldn't not mention it. Most importantly, it was the truth. Impossible. Gerald's first reaction was disbelief. It's true. He learned necromancy. The butler argued. Necromancy? Gerald didn't react for a moment. After a while, he said, "Is it the legendary necromancy?" The butler nodded. "You're saying that the child learned necromancy magic and injured you?" Gerald asked again. The butler nodded again. "Are you sure you're not seeing things?" Gerald didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Necromancy can hurt people? Ha! At this time, many servants had already come out of the front hall of the Naka Manor. Hearing the butler's words, many people covered their mouths and laughed. The butler didn't laugh. His expression was solemn and serious. "It's true, master." Gerard thought for a moment and decided to remind the servant, who was not very smart. "Master, it's not that I don't believe you, but what you said is just too unbelievable. The existence of necromancy has been proven to be a complete lie. There were once people who desperately advocated that necromancy was once the oldest and most powerful magic in the world. Its power was on par with magic, but it has been lost. However, it was later proven that they were just trying to cheat research funds." Gerald paused for a moment. The latest popular theory is that necromancy existed in ancient times, which is the era of the lost continent. It has been passed down to the present, but it should be said that a part of it has been lost, but I believe that it is definitely not as powerful as the legends say. Gerard glanced at the chief steward. "Do you understand now?" The head butler panicked. He didn't expect that no one would believe him. But, Uncle Gerard, what are you doing here?" The head butler's words were interrupted by a voice. Gerard looked and saw that it was his nephew Jordan. He immediately put on a smile, and there was even a hint of flattery in his smile. "Jordan, you're here?" There was a lot of movement in the Naka Manor. Jordan had already been awakened, and Mackinch was no exception. "What the hell is going on?" Jordan asked. Although he was only 16 years old, he had been nurtured by aristocratic temperament and etiquette since childhood and looked quite mature. Gerard didn't dare to hide anything and told Jordan and the others everything. Mackinch laughed after hearing it. "Uncle Gerard, you're too petty. I don't care about such a small matter. Who asked you to eliminate the root of the problem? It's superfluous. Our Shkin family is actually afraid of the revenge of a child? If this gets out, don't laugh your head off." "That's right." Jordan also stared and echoed. "Doesn't this show that we're obviously afraid of him? It's a disgrace to our family." Gerard didn't dare to refute and laughed a few times. "I'm just trying to be sure," he paused and said, "but this kid seems to have learned necromancy. Although I don't know how he learned it, and he even hurt my people." In front of outsiders, Gerard still chose to believe the words of his own people, which was the head butler. "Impossible." After Jordan heard it, he shook his head. He raised a finger and said proudly, "I think there are 3 reasons why it's impossible. First, in the Holy Roman Empire, necromancers are strictly prohibited from entering. Once discovered, they will be executed on the spot. To learn necromancy, unless it's in the Roland Empire, where the practice of any magic is not prohibited. Let me ask you, how could he learn necromancy in the Empire? Second, even if he learned necromancy, how could he hurt the head butler? Necromancy has long been proven to be useless. Jordan raised 3 fingers. Third, if he really learned necromancy and had considerable strength, then he should have used it when we were arguing. Unfortunately, he didn't. 1, 2, 3. Jordan's analysis was clear and logical. Even Gerard nodded secretly. As expected of a descendant from a large family, Chitterley couldn't be compared to him at all. Jordan smiled. In the end, my conclusion is that when the head butler was chasing after that kid, he was targeted by someone and injured. I think he's a bandit. Only bandits have the ability to conceal themselves. Jordan finished speaking and turned to Mackintosh. Am I right? Mackintosh nodded and gave him a thumbs up. He smiled sinisterly and said, although I don't know how the head butler got hurt, this kid is indeed unforgivable. That's right. He does need to be taught a lesson. Otherwise, this kid will be too arrogant. Jordan agreed with him. Mackintosh smiled and turned to Gerard. Uncle Gerard, do you want to make a small fortune? Gerard's heart skipped a beat. He smiled and said, what good idea does young Master Mackintosh have? A sinister look flashed across Mackintosh's eyes. Uncle Gerard, you don't necessarily have to do it yourself if you want to eliminate the root of the problem. In the Holy Roman Empire, necromancy is not allowed. Even necromancers are not allowed to enter. Once discovered, the Holy See has the right to execute them on the spot. Those who provide information about necromancers will be rewarded with 500 gold coins. If that kid really does practice necromancy, haha, Uncle Gerard, won't that be a small fortune? For the Schkin family, 500 gold coins were nothing in their eyes, but it was different in the eyes of the Nakamanner's Gerard. His eyes lit up. Young Master Mackintosh, are you serious? Of course. Mackintosh smiled. There's a holy church in Gold's Higher Town, not far from Manor Naka. You can bring the head butler there tomorrow morning. The Holy See will take care of things in the future. Thank you, young Master Mackintosh. Gerard was overjoyed and thanked him. The Holy See was the largest church in the Human Alliance. It had established a political and religious organization in the Holy Roman Empire. Within the Holy Roman Empire and its sphere of influence, all evil necromancers and evil creatures were prohibited from appearing. Otherwise, they would be executed in the name of heresy. Necromancers were one of the professions prohibited from entering the Holy Roman Empire. At this moment, a figure appeared at the staircase. He yawned and looked at everyone with sleepy eyes. It was Chitterley. What are you all doing? Everyone was speechless. Grandpa Homelin, are we going to start learning necromancy now? In an abandoned mine, Ron sat cross-legged on the ground and quietly looked at Homelin. His eyes shone with anticipation. We have to do a talent test first to see if you have the talent to practice necromancy. Homelin said with a smile. Ah? If I don't have the talent, then I can't become a necromancer? Ron was a little worried. Not necessarily. Talent and achievements are not necessarily related. Homelin shook his head. Those with high talent may not necessarily have high achievements, and those with low talent may not necessarily have low achievement. Talent will only make it easier for you to walk down this path. Seeing that Ron still didn't understand, Homelin explained patiently. For example, there are 2 types of power that are popular among humans. One is magic and the other is dochi. Those who practice magic need an extremely high talent in spiritual power, while those who practice dochi need an extremely strong physical talent. Or to be more specific, some people have a talent in water magic, and some have a talent in fire dochi. These talents are innate. But talent and achievement are not necessarily related. A person with talent for magic can also train their physique to reach the requirements of a dochi cultivator, and some people with talent for dochi can also train their mental strength to become a mage. These 2 are not contradictory. If a person with dochi talent practices dochi, then it will be relatively smoother. If you change to magic, then you will need a lot of perseverance. Moreover, the risk of not accomplishing anything is also very high. This is the reason why we need to test your talent. Its purpose is to let you walk on the path of cultivation, more like a pornographic novel. It's flatter. Grandpa Hamelin, I kind of understand. Ron thought for a while. Talent is like an interest. For example, if my interest is fishing, if someone is willing to teach me, my fishing skills will improve very quickly. Is that right? Yes, but if your interest is another kind of interest, such as cooking, then learning fishing will definitely be half the result with twice the effort. Hamelin explained with a smile. Of course, if you are really determined to learn, you may not necessarily fail. That's what I mean. Although talent is innate, it can actually be changed. But the time to change is very important. Generally speaking, the best time to change talent is between 8 to 14 years old. If you miss it, it will be very difficult to change it. Think about it, if a Qi practitioner only starts learning magic at the age of 40, what kind of achievements can he have? Chapter 10. Grandpa Hamelin, can we start now? Ron was a little impatient. Hamelin smiled. Sure, sit down and concentrate, listen to my orders. Yes, Grandpa Hamelin. Ron's eyes were firm, he sat cross-legged, his eyes fixed on Hamelin. No need to be so nervous, relax. Hamelin smiled. Let's start. Hamelin's eyes moved, his gaze became extremely sharp. He stretched out his fingertips, a black ray of light shot directly between Ron's eyebrows. It hurts. Ron only felt a pain in his head, he almost cried out. Bear with it, Ron, this is a necessary process. Hamelin coldly shouted. Yes. Ron gritted his teeth and endured, but this feeling was indeed very painful, that kind of pain, it hurt to the bones, it hurt to the depths of his soul. He did not know where the pain came from, but the pain was so real. Ron felt that his world was about to collapse. The sky was covered with dark clouds. Large beads of sweat flowed down from Ron's cheeks. His body trembled all over. Ron gritted his teeth. He constantly warned himself in his heart, Ron, didn't you always want to learn magic? Didn't you want to avenge Grandpa? You can't even bear this little pain, what can you do? No, I have to bear with it. In order to learn magic, I have to bear with it no matter how painful it is. In order to avenge Grandpa, I am not even afraid of death. Why would I be afraid of this little pain? Ron's heart gradually calmed down. He began to slowly adapt to this kind of pain. Seeing this, Hamelin could not help but secretly praise. Not bad, this kid's endurance is really strong. Hamelin said, to test the strength of the soul, you need a special testing tool. Unfortunately, I don't have it now, I can only wrong you. Child, bear with it. What Hamelin did was to separate the soul from Ron's body. The pain was unbearable, but Ron endured it. He did not even make a sound. Don't worry, Grandpa Hamelin, I can bear with it. Ron's voice was also trembling. Kacha kacha. At this time, Ron felt as if his head was about to split open. He seemed to hear a sound. At this time, the eyes, ears, mouth, and nose of Ron began to emit wisps of black gas. This black gas was faintly discernible, it was unreal. Under Hamelin's guidance, this black gas began to gradually condense above Ron's head, forming a black ball of light. The ball of light became bigger and bigger, sometimes turning into fog, sometimes turning into Ron's appearance. This was Ron's soul. Hamelin extracted his soul and carefully observed the power of his soul. This was the only way out of desperation. What a strong soul power, even in the scourge church of the past, this child would be a rare seedling. This black ball of gas was constantly trembling, but in Hamelin's eyes it was different. He could see at a glance that Ron's soul power was not weak. Hamelin secretly nodded. He made a hand gesture. His hands flat on the ground, The black ball of light wrapped around Ron's head suddenly dispersed, once again going back into Ron's eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. Ron only felt his head lighten, and with a thump sound, he hid on the ground. The pain disappeared, and Ron's world returned to its original state. Ugh! Ron groaned, crawling up from the ground, wiping the sweat on his forehead with his hand, impatiently asking, "Grandpa Homelin, how is my talent?" Homelin smiled. "Ron, congratulations, your talent is not bad. You definitely have the qualifications to practice necromancy." "That's great." Ron jumped 3 feet into the air, his head almost touching the ceiling of the mine. He was truly happy that he could finally learn necromancy magic. "Grandpa Homelin, I was so worried just now, I thought I wouldn't be able to hold on," Ron said, sticking out his tongue. Homelin smiled faintly. "Ron, actually you don't have to worry, necromancy is different from magic. Even if you can't become a necromancer, you can still become a death knight, a shadow assassin, a necromancer, or a warlock. It's enough to take revenge for your grandfather." "There are so many professions in necromancy?" Ron couldn't help smacking his lips when he heard this. He then smiled and asked, "Grandpa Homelin, can I practice undead magic now?" Homelin shook his head, smiling as he said, "Ron, do you know what necromancy needs to be practiced? Is it mental strength?" Ron thought for a moment and answered. He knew that mages practiced mental strength, and he thought necromancers were the same. "No." Homelin shook his head. He saw that Ron didn't understand, so he decided to explain from another angle. "Ron, you have to know that there are all kinds of elements in the world. They are fire, earth, wind, thunder, water, light, darkness, and so on. These elements exist in the space around us." "The space around us, could it be that we have it here too?" Ron asked in surprise. "Of course there is." "Then why can't I see it?" "They are very, very small, so you can't see them, but they are everywhere." "Oh Ron nodded, seeming to understand. "The essence of magic and fighting aura is actually the same. They are both the application of all kinds of elemental energy in the world. However, they also have differences. Magic is about control, controlling all kinds of elemental energy in the world. Mages themselves don't have any power, their power lies in mobilization. Fighting aura is the opposite. He absorbs some kind of elemental energy in the world into his body and releases it from his body. This requires an extremely strong constitution to be able to contain so much elemental energy in the world. However, his elemental energy is not limitless. Using it in battle will consume it, and when it is consumed, he needs to recover. Recovery is to absorb elemental energy again before he can continue to battle." Homelin explained. "In other words, magic and fighting aura are actually the difference between one's body and the others outside." Ron thought for a moment and said, "Smart." Homelin smiled. "Oh, no wonder mages are so much more powerful than warriors. So they can mobilize the elemental energy outside their bodies. The elemental energy outside their bodies is naturally much more than the energy inside their bodies." Ron understood a little. "That's not entirely the case." Homelin shook his head. "Although mages can mobilize the elements, they can't mobilize too much. How much they can mobilize is determined by their mental strength, and they can't mobilize the elemental energy of the world without limit," Homelin said slowly. "If they can do this, they would already be gods." "I see." Ron nodded. "This way, the starting point of mages and warriors isn't too far apart." "You're wrong again. The reason why mages are noble is firstly because there are fewer of them than warriors. Secondly, most of their magic is group skills, and its use is much more practical than a warrior's single-target skills." Homelin smiled. "Of course, we necromancers also have group skills. However, the way we practice necromancy is different from magic and fighting aura. What we practice is soul power, which is the power of the soul." "The power of the soul?" Ron didn't quite understand. "The soul also has power?" "Of course it does. The amount of soul power determines the level of your magic. With enough soul power, you can use necromancy magic, and even powerful necromancy magic. These all require a strong soul power as support. Homelin explained. I see, then how do I train my soul power? Ron thought for a while. Focus your mind, first feel your soul. In the abandoned mine, Ron was sitting in a strange position. His eyes were closed, and his hands were stretched out flatly. His 5 fingers were bent into a claw shape, and he was quietly feeling his soul power. Soul power, Ron kept repeating these words in his heart, but the strange thing was that he didn't feel anything even after sitting for a long time. Ron was so anxious that he was sweating profusely. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to feel his soul power and practice necromancy magic. The more anxious he was, the more he couldn't feel it. His forehead was covered in sweat, and his body was trembling non-stop. No, Grandpa Homelin, I can't feel anything. Ron was a little discouraged, and put down his hands. Homelin smiled. Ron, you're too impatient. I know that your impatience to avenge your grandfather has affected your state of mind. The more impatient you are, the worse it will be. How about this, empty your mind, don't think about anything, and quietly feel your soul. Yes, Grandpa Homelin. Ron nodded heavily and once again assumed that strange position. Don't think about anything. Don't think about anything, a blank space, a blank space. After an unknown period of time, Ron gradually entered the zone. The mysterious necromancy magic had finally opened a door for him. What is this place? Ron seemed to have entered an illusion. At first, it was blank, but slowly, his world began to appear clearly. At first, there was a bit of black gas. He rubbed his eyes and saw a bit more. The black gas grew bigger and bigger, and slowly, it outlined a human figure. Ron opened his mouth wide in shock. That figure was none other than himself. He saw himself sitting there in a strange posture. On his forehead, there was a ball of black gas that was constantly rotating, emitting threads of power. Although these threads of power were very small, Ron could clearly feel them. I feel it, Grandpa Homelin, I feel it. This is soul power. Ron shouted excitedly. Genius! A smile appeared on Homelin's face. To be able to enter that state so quickly and feel the power of his soul so quickly, Ron's talent could only be described as a genius. Homelin hadn't thought that the little radish Ron would have such a high talent in soul cultivation. The ball of light dispersed, and Ron opened his eyes. His face was brimming with excitement. Grandpa Homelin, I feel it, I finally feel it. Chapter 11. The next morning, Gerald sent Jordan and Mackintosh away. Nobles like them could not stay in this small place for too long. Staying for 2 days was already giving Gerald a lot of face. After Jordan and Mackintosh left, Gerald immediately brought Keatley and the butler to the Holy Church in Gold's Hire Town. Search for the latest updates here. This was an extremely grand, luxurious, and solemn building. It took up a lot of space, but they were able to build such a grand church in such a remote town. From this, one could see how powerful and wealthy the Holy Church was. Even the mayor's house wasn't as luxurious as this. Keatley looked at the Holy Church enviously. If only he could work in it. Even if he was a small guard, his status was much higher than the owner of Manor Naka. The door of the church opened, and a thin old man walked out. He saw Gerald and asked, "Who are you? What are you doing in the Holy Church of Gold's Hire Town?" Gerald smiled and said, "Sir, I am the owner of Manor Naka. I am here to visit the Aryan priest. I have important matters to discuss." Gerald did not dare to offend the gatekeeper of the Holy Church. He had to look at the owner's face before beating the dog. "Oh," the skinny man arrogantly replied. In fact, he was just a commoner, but due to the accumulated merits of his ancestors, he obtained the position of the gatekeeper of the Holy Church. Naturally, he became cocky. Everyone in the surrounding towns and villages, even the mayor of the town, had to bow their heads and bow to him. This gave him great satisfaction. He arrogantly looked up and down at Gerard and the others. Their clothes were very decent, and he roughly estimated their income. He snorted coldly. If there are people asking to see the Aryan priests every day, and everyone says that they have important things to do, then we priests don't have to do anything. We just have to receive people like you. Gerald sweated profusely when he heard this. However, he could not afford to offend the gatekeeper. He could only say, "We do have important matters." The thin man snorted again and said in a strange voice, "I don't care if it's important or not. However, if you want to see the Aryan priest, you have to follow the rules." "What rules?" Gerald asked. The skinny man was a little dissatisfied. "I say you're dressed like a dog. Why don't you know the rules?" He stretched out 2 fingers. This, do you understand?" "Understood. Understood." Seeing this gesture, even a stupid person would understand. He immediately took out 2 gold coins from his pocket and handed it over. The skinny man took it and looked at it, but found that the number was wrong. He stared. "Are you trying to dismiss a beggar? Only 2 gold coins and you want to see an Aryan priest? Then, how much is that?" Gerard was stunned. 20 gold coins. The skinny man said without hesitation. "Ah!" Hearing this price, everyone was shocked. It wasn't that they couldn't afford 20 gold coins, but they felt that it was too expensive. They didn't think that a gatekeeper of the Holy Church would cost so much. "No money? If you can't afford it, then scram." The gatekeeper glared at him and was about to close the door. At this moment, Chitley was dissatisfied. "What are you saying? Believe it or not, I'll teach you a lesson." "Ha! You're actually threatening me." The skinny man sneered and opened the door. He put his hands on his waist and shouted, "I'll wait." "How are you going to teach me a lesson, you?" Chitley's face turned purple. He stretched out his hand and was about to draw his sword. The skinny man sneered. Don't. It's all a misunderstanding." Gerald was shocked. He thought that this stupid boy couldn't do anything right. He actually dared to draw his sword in the Holy Church. He didn't want to live anymore. If this was the case, then he wouldn't be able to stay in the Holy Roman Empire, unless he escaped to another country. Gerald softened his tone and took out a bag from his chest. "Sir, my son is not sensible. Please don't argue with him. Here are 20 gold coins. I want to see an Aryan priest." "Humph, that's more like it." The skinny man reached out and took Gerald's bag. He weighed it in his hand and smiled with satisfaction before opening the door. Gerald's heart was somewhat depressed. He hadn't even seen the Aryan priest, and had already given out a lot of gold coins. This man clearly said that it was 20 gold coins, but the first 2 gold coins were not returned. He had already given out 22 gold coins. However, when he thought of the 500 gold coins reward, Gerald was relieved. He understood the principle of not giving out a small fortune, but it was difficult to obtain a large fortune. He followed the skinny man into the cathedral. In the center of the cathedral, under the seat of God Guangming, he saw the Aryan priest worshipping with his back facing them. The priest was wearing a black priest's robe with angel wings embroidered on the shoulder. He put his hands together and prayed. "Shoo! The priest is worshipping." "Wait a moment," the skinny man said. Gerald had to wait for a while. After a while, the priest finished his worship and turned around. Only then did Gerald see the priest's appearance. He had a bald head, a thick beard on his chin, and a cross-shaped angel statue on his chest. His whole person exuded a holy aura. Seeing the 3 people, he asked the gatekeeper, "What are they doing here?" "Father, they have something to ask you," the skinny man said respectfully. The Aryan priest nodded. "Well, you can go." The man left. The Aryan priest looked up and down at the 3 people. He didn't greet them and said faintly, "What's the matter?" Say it quickly. Yes, Father Arian. Gerald couldn't hide his excitement. As a person of God, I should report the evil I see to God and let God spread His light to purify everything in the world. Gerald took a deep breath. Father Arian, I found a necromancer in Maple Leaf Town. What? A necromancer? The priest's closed eyes suddenly opened. His eyes were like lightning as he stared at Gerald. Is this true? It's true, Gerald said solemnly. I am the owner of Manor Naka. My housekeeper was attacked by a necromancer at night. I and 2 servants were also killed by the necromancer. The Aryan priest turned to the housekeeper and asked in a deep voice, Did you see it with your own eyes? Yes, I saw it with my own eyes. The housekeeper nodded bitterly. He summoned 4 skeletons and killed my brothers. I was also injured but luckily escaped with my life. Let me see the wound, the Aryan priest said. The housekeeper took off his clothes and showed the wound to the Aryan priest. That's it? Well, it seems to be caused by necromancy. But how can necromancy cause such damage? On the contrary, it's very similar to the wounds caused by thieves. The Aryan priest finished speaking and waved his hand. A holy white light lit up and dispelled the venom around the wound. Then, the wound miraculously healed. Thank you, Father Arian. The housekeeper was overjoyed. Gerald's heart trembled. The Aryan priest's skill was not simple. It was called advanced healing. A small church had this unique skill. The strength of the Holy See was beyond doubt. No need to thank me. It is the duty of the Holy See to save the wounded, the Aryan priest said expressionlessly. Gerald asked puzzledly, Father Arian, isn't necromancy useless magic? How could he hurt my housekeeper? That's impossible. The Aryan priest looked at him. Necromancy does not have much combat power, but that is relative to the same profession. In other words, his housekeeper's strength was too weak. Gerald was speechless. His housekeeper was at least an intermediate novice. He was not an ordinary person. Of course, he did not dare to say this in front of the priest. The Aryan priest thought for a moment and said, Although this necromancer is still a child, and is not a threat to us, it is the glorious mission of the Holy See to eliminate the evil in the world. Heretics like the necromancer must be purified. We don't care about what happens in the Roland Empire, but in the Holy Roman Empire, there must be no necromancers. The Aryan priest's words were loud and clear. Pornographic novels God Guangming above. Gerald said devoutly, Father Arian, I will take you to see the place where the incident happened last night. The tragedy that happened last night by the river could be hidden from others, but it could not be hidden from the residents of the town. For a moment, the whole town became lively. People surrounded the stone bridge and pointed at it. On the stone bridge of Maple Leaf Town, more than 20 Holy See guards slowly walked over. They were wearing the same red and white uniform. They were the main guards of the Holy Cathedral in Gold's Higher Town. In order to eliminate the necromancer, Arian brought them out. By the river, the Holy See guard led the Aryan priest to carefully observe the headless body of the brown-haired man and then said, This is a fatal blow. The cut is clean, but this alone cannot prove that it was done by the necromancer. It seems like the work of a thief or a swordsman. The Aryan priest then turned to the body of the man in black. 4 swords pierced from different angles. It seems that the assassins cooperated well. However, this also does not prove anything. There is no evidence. There is no conclusive evidence at all. The Aryan priest pondered. After a while, he turned his head and said to a Holy See guard, Call me a townsman who knows him. Yes. Father, after a while, the fat Aunt Susan stood in front of the Aryan priest. It was the first time she saw such a big figure. She could not help but feel a little nervous. That child is called Ron. Has he been here for a long time? The Aryan priest asked pleasantly. Yes, Father. He came here with a wandering old man. It has been more than 10 years. Aunt Susan replied honestly. Then let me ask you, have you seen him practice necromancy? The Aryan priest asked. What is necromancy? Aunt Susan did not understand. That is. The Aryan priest did not know how to explain it. He thought for a moment and said, did he do anything strange? For example, there are skeletons around him or something. The Aryan priest's words were full of persuasion. No, he did not. Really? The Aryan priest did not believe it. Really? If you don't believe me, Father, you can ask the other townsfolk. They are very familiar with Ron. Aunt Susan thought for a moment. But he did do something strange. He went to the Maple Forest Ancient Road every afternoon, no matter what happened. The Aryan priest caught this point. What did he go there for? I'm not sure. I heard that he wanted to be apprenticed to a teacher and learn magic. Oh yes, his dream is to become a great magician. Aunt Susan said with a smile. Stopping a passing magician and asking them to teach him magic. Only a child like Ron could think of such a naive idea. Chapter 12. Aunt Susan bowed and turned to leave. After the inspection, Father Aryan took out a white handkerchief and wiped his hands, then threw it on the ground. At this moment, a Holy See guard quickly ran over and whispered a few words in Aryan's ear. Search for the latest updates here. Aryan heard this and his face sank. He said lightly, I know. He turned around and stared at the butler, his cold eyes constantly staring at him. This is the necromancer you were talking about? No, sir. This is indeed done by that kid. The butler was shocked and said with a red face. Aryan snorted coldly. I don't care who did it. We just need to find the necromancer. Where is the necromancer you were talking about? Where is he? He ran away. Under the murderous gaze of the Aryan priest, the chief butler stuttered. So, you don't have any evidence? Father Aryan's face became unfriendly. The butler was speechless. Seeing that the atmosphere was a little stiff, Gerald immediately interrupted and said hurriedly, Father Aryan, God Guangming above, I can guarantee that everything my butler said is true. He has been with me for more than 10 years, and I have no need to lie to you, sir. Father Aryan narrowed his eyes and said to Gerald, Gerald, if I remember correctly, you are the owner of Manor Naka, not far from Maple Leaf Town, right? Yes, sir. Gerald felt the murderous aura of his opponent and immediately replied in fear and trepidation. I also remember that you have an elder sister who married into the Salter family. Yes, sir. Gerald did not know why Father Aryan suddenly mentioned this matter. Aryan snorted coldly. Gerald, you said there was a necromancer, and I immediately came out with you with so many people, but you played me like a monkey? Is it because you have the name of the Salter family that I don't dare to touch you? Where did this come from? Gerald was dumbfounded. He did not expect the situation to take a turn for the worse. He hurriedly said, Sir, this is the truth. Truth? Where did the truth come from? Did you see this with your own eyes? Father Aryan sneered. Gerald was at a loss for words. He really didn't see anything and only believed the butler's one-sided story. At this moment, he didn't trust his butler anymore. Could it be that he failed the mission and made up an excuse to lie to me? Although the Aryan priests didn't get angry, Gerald and the others didn't dare to breathe too loudly. The chief butler also didn't say anything. Even the arrogant Chitley became well-behaved. In front of the Holy Church, they didn't have the right to be arrogant. Aryan's face softened a little when he saw Gerald giving in. Gerald, what should I say to you? In front of me, everything must be based on evidence. Don't speak carelessly without evidence, and don't casually accuse someone of heresy. You must know that in the eyes of the Church, this is not a small matter. Yes. At this moment, not only Gerard, but even the butler was sweating profusely. Pornographic novels. According to my investigation, your son killed someone when he was playing in Maple Leaf Town. That is to say, this is your business and has nothing to do with necromancers. If someone who has a grudge with others falsely accuses others of being heretics, then won't our Holy See become a tool for revenge? Father Arian's voice suddenly became very strict. We Holy See spread the glory of God Guangming and destroy the heretical forces of darkness. But it does not mean that we Holy See are willing to be used by others. Gerald broke out in cold sweat. Father Arian's label was too big. Yes, sir, Father, I'm sorry, I saw wrongly. The butler knew that the situation was not good and immediately apologized. At this time, he did not care whether the matter was true or false. He even suspected that what he saw last night was real or a dream. Father Arian snorted. For the sake of the Salter family, I will let this matter go. But I do not wish for there to be a next time. Yes, sir, I am very sorry about this matter. Gerald also wiped his cold sweat. Father Arian's expression softened. Of course, Gerald, if there is any news about the necromancer, I would welcome it. But if there is no evidence, then there is no need to say anything. He took a deep breath and tightened his black priest's robe. So be it. Sigh this damn weather, Father Arian said and ignored Gerald. He walked away, and the red-robed Holy See guards followed him. Motherf *Cur. After the Arian priest left, Gerald's face turned completely gloomy, and he blurted out a curse. He reported Ron for 2 reasons. First, to avenge his servant's death. Second, to make a small fortune. He did not expect that he would not make a small fortune. In order to meet Father Arian, he had to pay 22 gold coins. This made him feel as disgusted as if he had eaten a fly. Father, let's go back. It was rare for Chitley to not make a fuss. Instead, he stretched out his hand and pulled Gerald's clothes. He was frightened by Father Arian. Only now did he know how powerful the Holy See was. Killing him was as easy as killing an ant. Gerald also calmed down at this time. He felt a trace of regret for his rude words. If it fell into the ears of Father Arian, although he had the protection of the Salter family, he was afraid that he would have to suffer some hardship. If I find that kid, I will cut him into pieces. Gerald remembered that all these troubles were caused by the kid named Ron. He also hated him and cursed in his heart. At this time, the townspeople saw that there was no more drama to watch and left. After all, they still had to make a living. Only Gerald and the other 2 were left standing there like fools. Gerald lost face in front of Father Arian today. He even paid 22 gold coins. His face was green and white. No, I can't let it go like this. Suddenly, Gerald jumped out and said, Father, what do you want? Chitley, the idiot, was also frightened by his father's rage. He had never seen his father so angry. Gerald's current appearance was extremely frightening. The muscles on his face twitched fiercely, the veins were exposed, and his eyes were bloodshot. His gaze was enough to kill. I want to kill this kid. Gerald fiercely squeezed out the words from between his teeth. Since the Holy See is unwilling to intervene, I will do it. I don't believe that I can't deal with a little brat who hasn't even grown out his hair. I think. Let's just forget about it, Chitley said carefully. He was afraid that his father would lose his mind. No, Gerard roared. He pointed at the butler. Go, investigate for me. Mobilize all the men in the Naka Manor and do your best to investigate for me. Yes, and also send out the Naka Guard. We must find out where that kid is hiding. I want to personally tear him apart. Yes, master. The head butler lowered his head deeply, his eyes flashing with excitement. He had long hated the child who had killed his brother to the core. The Naka Manor was not as simple as a manor. In the areas of Gold's Hire Town and Maple Leaf Town, it was still very powerful. There were many guards in the manor. These guards had a certain level of strength. Everyone knew that the Naka Manor was rich, but the bandits within 100 miles did not dare to have any ideas about the Naka Manor. Geralt was indeed very angry. His anger came from the fact that a little beggar had provoked his dignity and made him lose face in front of the Aryan priest. Of course, he never thought about how it happened. In the abandoned mine, Ron sat on the ground covered with black mud. His clothes were not very clean, and now they were even dirtier. Yes, that's right, that's it. Keep releasing your soul power until you've used up all of your soul power. Homelin patiently guided Ron in the practice of necromancy magic. And Ron did not disappoint his expectations. In just a few hours, he had mastered the practice of necromancy magic. At this time, Ron was sitting on the ground with his hands stretched out. His 5 fingers curled into a claw. In his hand, a black ball was constantly rotating, constantly releasing soul power. It could be seen that Ron's soul power was still very weak. The strength of magic depended on the spiritual force, the strength of battle chi depended on the physique, and the strength of necromancy depended on the soul. As long as the soul power was enough, powerful necromancy magic could be used. The practice of necromancy magic was a process of continuous training of the soul power, using a special method to exhaust all the soul power and then quickly replenish it. Consumption, replenishment, consumption, and replenishment. In this continuous cycle, the soul power was fully tempered and constantly developed. This principle was essentially the same as a warrior's physical training and a mage's spiritual force training. It was just that the direction of training was different. Homelin had a trace of satisfaction in his eyes. Ron's talent in necromancy magic was indeed not simple. In just half a day, he had already touched the soul and started practicing necromancy magic. This speed was beyond his expectations. The black ball in his hand moved and cracked open. Bits of mist drifted out and Ron opened his eyes. Grandpa Homelin, how many cycles have I gone through? If I'm not wrong, you should have gone through the 16th cycle. Ron, well done, Homelin said with a smile. There was no need for Homelin to say anything. Ron could already feel that he was different. His eyes were full of vigor, and his ears had become sharper. Every movement in his surroundings had become extremely sensitive. Even the world was filled with color at this moment. Soul touch. Ron's soul had become much stronger, and even his senses had become sharper. Chapter 13. What's going on? I feel like I'm full of power, and this power doesn't seem to be coming from my body, Ron said in amazement. It's coming from your soul, Homelin said with a smile. Your soul has become stronger. The source of power was the same, whether it came from the body, the spiritual force, or the soul. Although Ron's body did not change, he truly felt the growth of his power. Homelin smiled and pointed to the ring in his hand. Ron, the ring in your hand is no ordinary thing. It can speed up the recovery of your spiritual force. For necromancers, it's something they yearn for even in their dreams, Homelin smiled. Don't underestimate the use of this ring. It speeds up the recovery of spiritual force, which means that it speeds up the speed of cultivation. You can cultivate 2 to 3 cycles in the time it takes others to cultivate 1 cycle. Your cultivation speed is at least twice as fast. Moreover, in battle, this ring is even more useful. Ron took it off. Sure enough, the feeling of taking it off was completely different. There was a feeling of emptiness. He looked at the unremarkable ring in his hand, but he did not expect it to have such a heaven-defying effect. He thought back to when Grandpa Zari had picked it up from a street stall. That was a real gain. One had to know that in the Amros continent, where necromancy was rampant, a ring like this was definitely priceless. As long as it appeared, it would cause a bloodbath. Only a powerhouse with a status like Homelin was worthy of owning it. Otherwise, it would only bring about a fatal disaster. Grandpa Homelin, What's the name of this ring? Ron asked with interest. Soul ring. This is the name I gave it, Homelin said with a smile. Ron, this ring is for you. Take it as a gift for becoming my disciple. Thank you, Grandpa Homelin. Ron happily put the ring on, and that familiar feeling of fullness returned. Feeling the abundance of spiritual force, Ron excitedly rubbed his hands. Grandpa Homelin, can I go take revenge now? Revenge? It's still early. Homelin smiled faintly. Right now, you have only grasped the method of cultivation. Moreover, you have cultivated soul force. You are still unfamiliar with the control of soul force. Most importantly, you don't know how to use soul force. The use of soul energy. Ron's eyes widened. That's right. You have soul power, but you don't know how to use it. It's like a rich man who earns a lot of money but doesn't know how to spend it. Homelin paused. Now I'll teach you the most basic magic of necromancy, skeleton summoning. Warriors from the underworld, please accept my summons. Come out, skeleton warriors. Ron chanted an incantation, his hands constantly changing gestures. His palms emitted traces of black gas, which grew more and more as they floated to the ground. The ground began to blacken. The blackened ground formed a strong contrast with the yellow soil. The blackened area grew larger and larger until it was about a square foot in area. At this time, the ground shook and a white skull emerged from the ground. It used both its hands and feet to nimbly crawl out of the ground. The skeleton warrior held a short bone knife in its hand and had a dull look. It was completely different from the ferocious skeleton warriors that Homelin had summoned. Ron was a little dumbfounded. This was the skeleton warrior that he had summoned? How come it didn't seem powerful at all? Good, good, good. Homelin said the word good 3 times in a row. His face was full of excitement. Ron, I didn't expect you to be able to summon a skeleton warrior in such a short time. Not bad. But, Grandpa Homelin, this skeleton warrior is completely different from the skeleton warriors from last night. Ron stuttered as he asked. Homelin smiled and advised, Ron, you have to eat 1 bite at a time and walk 1 step at a time. You've only practiced for a day and you've already reached this level. It's really not bad. If you want to reach my level, you won't be able to do it without at least 10 years. Ron thought that it was true. He was indeed a little too impatient. He had only learned necromancy magic for a day. It was already amazing that he had made such progress. It was impossible for him to reach the heavens in a single step. He looked at the skeleton warrior in front of him. Because it hadn't received any orders from Ron, it had been in a daze. But I don't know how powerful it is, Ron thought. Homelin seemed to have seen through Ron's thoughts and said, Ron, why don't you give it a try? You'll have a deeper understanding of the skeleton warrior's strength. Ron nodded and led the skeleton warrior out of the cave. Looking at the sky, it was already afternoon. Unknowingly, a day had already passed. Ron looked around and chose a tree as thick as a bowl. He stretched out his hand and patted the trunk. Let's give it a try. Chop down this tree for me, Ron ordered. Unexpectedly, the skeleton warrior didn't move at all. Ron tried again, but the skeleton warrior still didn't move. Ron didn't know what to do. At this moment, Homelin's voice sounded, controlling the skeleton warrior doesn't require words, but heart. Ron was a little puzzled. Yes, heart. Homelin patiently explained, because the skeleton warrior is a pornographic novel that you've summoned. It's connected to your soul. As long as you use your heart to control it, you'll definitely succeed. According to what Homelin's grandfather said, Ron silently commanded the skeleton to attack. This time, the skeleton warrior moved. With a dash, it quickly arrived in front of the tree. With a light wave of the bone knife in its hand, the small tree fell down. Too powerful. Ron excitedly clapped his hands. For the first time, he felt a strong sense of accomplishment. Let's try this. Ron once again used another necromancy spell that he had just learned, Bone Spur. As he chanted in a low voice, a small bone spur formed in his hand. Necromancy spell, Bone Spur. It's one of the short-ranged single-target necromancy spells. It has a short summoning time, low consumption, and strong concealment. The attack range is generally only a dozen meters, depending on the amount of soul power. When used in a sneak attack, it can have a surprising effect. Homelin's voice sounded in Ron's ear. Ron's mind moved, and the small bone spur in his hand flew out. Pring! The small bone spur had already sunk into the hard tree, leaving only a short section outside. What a strong power! Ron was shocked. If this had pierced an ordinary person, it would have directly pierced through. Although the bone spur was small, its power was not ordinary. With them, Ron was suddenly full of confidence in his revenge plan. Homelin seemed to know what Ron was thinking, and immediately poured cold water on him. Don't think of others as simple. With your current strength, you can only deal with ordinary people who have not cultivated. If you were to meet those people from last night, you would definitely not be their match. Grandpa Homelin, don't worry. I know what to do. Ron humbly accepted Homelin's lesson. He understood that in a situation where he was not strong enough, rashly seeking revenge would only be sending himself to death. Ron would not do such a foolish thing. The key was that he was still young, only 15 years old. He had plenty of time to wait. Homelin nodded. Ron was a smart child and understood with a hint. Ron still wanted to continue practicing, but at this time, a sound rang out. Goo! Goo! Ron was a bit embarrassed, but Homelin laughed. You must be hungry. He was a soul, so of course he would not feel hungry, but Ron was different. Ron nodded. He had not eaten since last night, and now he was very hungry. Let's go find something to eat first. Maple Leaf Town, since the withdrawal of the Holy Sea Guards, returned to peace. It was so peaceful that it was as if nothing had happened. The two bodies by the stone bridge had already been cleaned up. Ron knew that he had killed people, so naturally he would not appear in Maple Leaf Town openly. He had secretly sneaked back. Under the stone bridge in Maple Leaf Town, Ron's home was in a mess. Everything had been rummaged through. Of course, except for a few pieces of clothes, he did not have anything valuable. Shaking his head with a wry smile, Ron turned around and ran to Aunt Susan's house. When he came to Aunt Susan's door, Ron gently knocked on the door. The door opened, and the fat Aunt Susan appeared in front of the door. When she saw Ron, her expression suddenly changed. She pulled Ron into the house, then looked around vigilantly. When she found that no one was around, she closed the door with relief. As soon as she entered the door, Aunt Susan lowered her voice and asked, "Ron, why are you back?" Ron seemed to see something from Aunt Susan's sensitive eyes. "Aunt Susan, what happened?" "Ron, did you kill someone?" Aunt Susan asked nervously. Ron was stunned for a moment. He did not want to deceive the kind Aunt Susan, so he nodded gently. "This is bad." Aunt Susan sighed and said, "The people of Manor Naka are looking for you everywhere. I don't know why, but today Geralt was extremely angry and swore that he had to find you. He also issued a reward of 50 gold coins just to find you. Is it because I killed his people? His son killed my grandfather and sent someone to kill me. Now that his people are dead, he's taking his anger out on me. Should I just stand there and let him kill me?" Ron's eyes became angry. His son killed my grandfather and sent someone to kill me. Looking at Ron's serious expression, Aunt Susan shook her head and sighed. "Ron, there's no way to reason with those nobles. In their eyes, what are we? Unless I'm stronger than them." Ron's eyes were full of vengeance. He clenched his hair and gritted his teeth. Aunt Susan was silent for a moment and did not speak. Suddenly, Aunt Susan seemed to think of something. She grabbed Ron's arm and asked in horror, "Ron, tell me honestly, did you learn some undead magic?" Ron hesitated for a moment and nodded. This is bad. Aunt Susan nervously rubbed her hands and kept muttering, "What should we do? What should we do now? What's going on? Aunt Susan?" Ron felt strange and asked, "How do you know?" Chapter 14. Ron's eyes widened. Being in the Holy Roman Empire, he naturally knew the power of the Holy See, especially the Arian priests, who had some supreme status in this area. He saw with his own eyes that the mayor of Maple Leaf Town nodded and bowed in front of the Arian priests. Listening to Aunt Susan's tone, it seemed that the Holy See was also looking for him. Could it be that even the Vatican was alarmed by the fact that I killed someone? Ron took a deep breath. This is too unbelievable. No, it's because you learned necromancy. Aunt Susan sighed and said, Ron, you know, in the Holy Roman Empire, you are not allowed to practice necromancy. You violated their taboo. If they found out, you would be burned as a heretic. I wanted to avenge my grandfather. Ron's eyes were red. In order to avenge his grandfather, he longed for power, even if he had to practice necromancy. Even if he could go back in time and choose again, he would not hesitate to practice necromancy. Ron, it's best not to learn. Otherwise, you will really be killed by them. Aunt Susan is not joking. Aunt Susan sighed. Fortunately, the Arian priests did not find any evidence today, but it seems that they are a little skeptical, otherwise. Aunt Susan did not finish her sentence, but Ron should know what she meant. If the Holy See were to pursue him, Ron would not be so relaxed. In fact, the result was not bad. Ron killed someone, and he would die if he was caught. Practicing necromancy in the Holy Roman Empire would also result in death, so there was no difference. Ron, I can understand your feelings. Aunt Susan glanced at Ron and said hesitantly, How about this? The Arian priests in Gold's Hire Town are relatively fair. I think if you go to them, at least you can get justice. Justice? Aunt Susan, I used to believe that there was justice and justice in the world, but now, hee. Ron became excited and sneered. Ever since Grandpa Zaley died, Ron no longer trusted anyone except for Grandpa Homelin. After taking a deep breath, Ron was immersed in his memories as he murmured, Grandpa Zaley was such a good person. He would never compete with others for anything. If he begged for food, he would give it to others. If he didn't give it to others, he would still smile. He never quarreled with others, nor was he angry with others. However, such a person was beaten to death by those so-called nobles. Ron's eyes were a little red. He turned around and quietly wiped his tears. Aunt Susan was silent. I've finally seen through it. In this world, there is no such thing as justice. Even if there is, justice can't win against money. And money can't win against power. And power can't win against strength. In this world, only strength is king. Only strength is everything. Only by learning necromancy did I have the chance to avenge my grandfather. Turning around, Ron's eyes were filled with bone-deep hatred. Sooner or later, I'll tear them to shreds, one by one. Aunt Susan bit her lips. Ron, I can't control you. In short, you have to be careful. I will. Thank you, Aunt Susan. I know that you have always been good to me, Ron said softly. At this time, Ron said embarrassedly, Aunt Susan, I'm hungry. Is there anything to eat? Aunt Susan nodded and sighed. She turned around and went to the kitchen. When she came out, she was holding a sumptuous meal. Ron was not picky. He took it and started eating. He ate very quickly. He had not eaten for a day and a night. He was indeed hungry. Looking at Ron, who was wolfing down the food in front of her, Aunt Susan made up her mind and said hesitantly, Ron, I'm afraid I can't take you in here. You see, Ron raised his head, looked at Aunt Susan and nodded. Aunt Susan was just an ordinary civilian. For her to do this, she was already very good to him. I understand, Aunt Susan. I won't cause you any trouble, After finishing the food quickly, Ron embarrassedly wiped his mouth. "I'm leaving, Aunt Susan." After saying that, he turned around and left. "Wait!" Aunt Susan called out to him. Aunt Susan handed a package to Ron. Ron took it and looked at her in confusion. "Ron, leave here and never come back. This is 3 days' worth of food. I can only help you this much, thank you." Ron's eyes were moist. "Go through the back door." When the back door opened, Aunt Susan looked around vigilantly. When she saw that there was no one, she let Ron go out. Although she was just a village woman, she was still very shrewd. Before leaving, Aunt Susan's eyes were a little reluctant to part with him. She sighed and said to Ron, "Ron, since you have already embarked on this road, I won't say anything. Be careful." Ron nodded. "I will." Aunt Susan smiled, lowered her voice and said softly, "Ron, leave the Holy Roman Empire immediately and go to the Roland Empire." Ron's small figure slowly left. After walking a few steps, he suddenly turned back and bowed deeply toward Aunt Susan's house. A fat figure appeared in front of the window. She looked at Ron's back and sighed weakly. Although Ron was extremely careful when he walked to Maple Leaf Town, he was still discovered by 3 townspeople. "Isn't that the Ron that Manor Naka is looking for?" A townspeople rubbed his eyes and pointed at Ron's back. "He really showed up." Another young townspeople in blue rubbed his hands excitedly. "Catch him and hand him over to Manor Naka. We can get a lot of rewards." The eyes of the young man in blue flashed with greed. "Hey, have you heard? Manor Naka offered 50 gold coins to inquire about Ron's whereabouts. If you can catch him, 100 gold coins. However, I heard from the people there that the kid learned some troublesome undead magic." Another townspeople in blue said hesitantly, "It seems that he has become very powerful. He even killed 2 people last night. Listen to their bragging." The young man in blue said, "How many years has that kid been in Maple Leaf Town? When have you seen him use undead magic? If he had this ability, would he still need to beg?" "That's true." The first townspeople nodded. He thought for a moment. "We still have to be careful. I believe that the Vatican shouldn't be baseless. So what if it's true? Undead magic, isn't that the most trashy magic? No, it shouldn't be called magic at all." The young man in blue sneered. "Some people say how powerful undead magic is, but it's just a legend." The saying that undead magic was trashy magic had long been spread. Even the people in the remote towns of the Holy Roman Empire knew about it. "But I think we still have to be careful," a townspeople whispered. "All right then." The young man in blue nodded. "There are a few people from Manor Naka outside the town. You go and call them. I'll go and stop him." "Okay." The 2 of them ran away quickly. One went to Manor Naka outside the town, and the other went back to call for people. "If I catch this kid, I'll be rich." The young man in blue sneered at the other 2 people's figures in the distance. The reward of 100 gold coins was still very attractive to these townspeople who were used to poverty. He pinched his chin with his hand and couldn't help but fantasize in his heart. "Yo, my Ron, where are you going?" The young man in blue walked up quickly to stop Ron and said with a smile. Seeing this person, Ron became vigilant. He knew this young man in blue. He was a famous hooligan in Maple Leaf Town. He had done all kinds of bad things except for good things. He had bullied Ron many times before, and it was still fresh in his memory. "What do you want?" "Nothing, Ron." "You haven't eaten yet, right? How about coming to my house for dinner?" The young man in blue stopped him and said with a pleasant face. At this time, his face was full of smiles, but in Ron's eyes, this smile was a little malicious. "No need." Ron shook his head without hesitation. "I have something to do. I'll leave first." After saying that, he didn't talk nonsense with him and turned to leave. Hey, why are you leaving?" The young man in blue shouted and immediately stopped Ron. Ron turned back and squeezed out a smile. "I'm leaving here. Thank you for taking care of me all these years. Damn it, why is that guy taking so long to call someone? Why hasn't he come yet? The young man in blue looked around and cursed in his heart. Seeing that Ron ignored him and was about to leave, he was anxious. Seeing that the cooked duck was about to fly away in front of his eyes, he couldn't care less. He grabbed Ron's arm and shouted, "You can't go, let go!" Ron glared at him and struggled hard, but he couldn't break free. The man's hand held him tightly. The smile on the young man's face disappeared, and he finally showed his original face. His face was ferocious, and he said with a sinister smile, "Ron, if you go, what about my money?" Ron finally knew what he was going to do. This man wanted to catch him, and then hand him over to Manor Naka for a reward. Ron's face suddenly turned cold. "If you don't let go, I won't be polite. Hee hee, you want to try? Don't think that you're powerful just because you learned some undead magic. Let me tell you, I'm not afraid." The young man in blue laughed. Then, his laughter turned into a pig-like squeal. It turned out that Ron had bitten him hard on the arm. After he felt the pain, he let go and Ron turned and ran. Chapter 15. Ron quickly ran out of the town, with the young man in blue chasing after him. His speed was still very fast, and the young man in blue was left further and further behind. At this moment, a group of people appeared in front of Ron, running towards him in a hubbub. The young man in blue was overjoyed and immediately shouted, "Stop him, he is Ron." The people who appeared in front of Ron were the townspeople called by the man just now. Those people were holding simple weapons, such as sticks, in their hands. When they saw Ron, they were obviously stunned. "He is Ron. Catch him, there will be 100 gold coins." A thought rose in the minds of those townspeople, and their calm eyes were replaced by a look of greed. Catch him. Money blinded reason, and 100 gold coins made these townspeople, who were aloof from worldly affairs, become fanatical. Catch him, there will be 100 gold coins. Without hesitation, they raised the sticks in their hands and madly rushed towards Ron. Ron was stunned. He had lived in Maple Leaf Town for more than 10 years, and was quite familiar with the townspeople. But now, looking at the townspeople's faces, he felt a trace of strangeness. Run, there was only one thought in Ron's mind. He quickly turned in a direction, and the townspeople followed closely behind like crazy beasts. There was no way out. A wall blocked Ron, and he had no way to escape. Ron turned his head and saw the townspeople who were crazy for money. They seemed to see Ron's helplessness, but they still approached step by step. The young man in blue grinned. "Ron, run, why don't you run?" With that, he took a wooden stick from a person next to him and slowly approached. Ron bowed his head, still holding a glimmer of hope in his heart. He bit his lip and said softly, "Uncles of Maple Leaf Town, are you really going to do this to me? Uncle Barter, have you forgotten that your daughter fell into the river and I saved her? Uncle Jobs, have you forgotten that I often come to help you with your work?" Ron's childish voice echoed in the surroundings. There was some hesitation in the crowd. Many people began to hesitate. After all, Ron grew up in Maple Leaf Town. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, the blue-clothed youth immediately said in a loud voice, "Don't listen to his nonsense. Master Geralt said that as long as we capture him, he'll give us 100 gold coins. 100 gold coins. Moreover, this Ron also practices evil necromancy magic." Hearing this, the eyes of those people became firm. "No." Ron desperately waved his hands. Unfortunately, no one was willing to listen to his explanation. Step by step, they approached. "Hee hee, Ron, don't waste your time." The young man in blue sneered and said, "Over the years, you've been eating our food, wearing our clothes, and we've raised you. It's time to repay us." Ron looked at the familiar faces of the townsfolk. Under the influence of money, they had become so unfamiliar. "Uncles, uncles, don't force me," Ron said as he bit his lip, but no one listened to him. At this time, a sigh came from the depths of his soul. Do it, Ron. They're no longer the townsfolk you're familiar with. It turned out that Homelin couldn't stand it anymore. In that case, I won't hold back. Ron's heart became cold. Since these townsfolk didn't care about their former friendship at all, there was no need for him to hide it. Compared to the warriors, the mage series of professions seemed so elegant. Ron moved his hand, and a bunch of black gas was emitted from his hand. He muttered something, and in the blink of an eye, 5 skeleton warriors drilled out of the ground. They held small bone knives in their hands and stared blankly at the large group of townsfolk in front of them with their green eyes. The townsfolk were scared stiff. He's really a necromancer. He can summon skeletons. What evil magic! The townsfolk's eyes were filled with fear. They didn't want to fight with these terrifying monsters. They began to shrink back again. Don't be afraid of them. They're just useless skeletons. The youth in blue immediately encouraged the townsfolk. He had been to the Roland Empire and knew some things about necromancers. Many people were scared stiff by the skeleton warriors, but even more people had heard of the legends of necromancy and didn't care about them. Kill this necromancer. This is heresy. He must be burned to death. The crowd became angry. Rather than saying that they were angry because Ron was a heresy, it was better to say that the magic of money made them greedy. The greedy townsfolk raised the sticks in their hands and smashed them viciously at the skeleton warriors. The skeleton warriors blocked them. Without Ron's order, they didn't dare to fight back. Soon, a skeleton warrior was knocked down and its bones scattered all over the ground. The bones that fell on the ground turned into a cloud of black gas and drifted away with the wind. The situation was getting worse. The townsfolk became even more frenzied. This indirectly confirmed one of the reasons necromancy was trash magic. These skeleton warriors were too weak. Ron had been restraining himself, but he found that there was no way out. Since you want to die, then don't blame me. Ron's eyes flashed with an ominous glint. Skeleton warriors, go. After receiving Ron's order, the skeleton warriors were fearless in the face of the raining sticks. They had no emotions and didn't know what fear was. They raised the bone swords in their hands and directly faced the stick. With a light slash of the bone swords, a large stick as thick as a bull's mouth was cut in two. The skeleton warriors didn't give up. They waved the bone swords in their hands again and ruthlessly stabbed into the stomach of a townsfolk. Cha! The bone swords weren't long, but they could still pierce through a human body. The townsfolk clutched his stomach with a look of disbelief. He couldn't believe what he saw in front of him, and even more couldn't believe that he would die in the hands of a necromancer who looked like trash. He was the gangster of Maple Leaf Town, the youth in blue who had just spoken to Ron. He suddenly knelt on the ground and muttered to himself, "Impossible! This isn't a necromancer." He died with a look of disbelief and greed for money on his face. He was the person Ron hated the most. He was the one who instigated these people to surround him, so Ron attacked him first. The youth in blue was just an ordinary gangster. He was as weak as a piece of paper in front of the skeleton warriors. Murder! The townsfolk cried out in panic. At the same time, they retreated in horror. Facing the fear of the unknown, no one would be stupid enough to throw their lives away. Ron commanded the skeleton warriors to injure a few more, but he didn't kill them. At this time, the crowd was in an uproar. Many people cried and shouted as they retreated. The scene was extremely chaotic for a while. In the chaos, Ron saw the fat Aunt Susan. He noticed that there was no fear on Aunt Susan's face. On the contrary, there was a trace of relief. "The guards of the Ennis Manor are here. The guards of the Ennis Manor are here." Just as the scene was in chaos, a voice came from afar. It turned out that the townsfolk had tipped them off and brought the guards of the Ennis Manor. They were searching for Ron in various villages and towns. As soon as they heard that Ron had appeared in Maple Leaf Town, they immediately brought people over. This was the NACA Manor's guard organization. There weren't many of them, but there were more than 10 of them. They were fully armed, wearing exquisite armor that shone under the sun. They were fully equipped with gauntlets, shoulder pads, and other equipment. They were riding tall horses with wide blades at their waist. Cold murderous intent filled the air. The Enisim Manor's guard captain saw Ron at a glance and was overjoyed. It seemed that this great merit almost belonged to him. "Get out of the way! Get out of the way!" The Enisim Manor's guards were not polite to the ordinary townsfolk. They whipped the townsfolk who were blocking the way until they cried for their parent. The leader of the Enisim Manor's guards dismounted from his horse and walked forward. He said coldly, "Ron, you killed the people of my Enisim Manor. If you know what's good for you, you should obediently put down your weapons and surrender. Our manor lord, Geralt, sees that you are young and might spare your life. Otherwise, I won't be polite." Everyone knew that in Geralt's eyes, Ron had no reason to save his life, but he still had to say some polite words. "You also practiced undead magic? This is great. The Holy See will definitely not let you go." When the guard captain saw the skeleton warrior summoned by Ron, he was not shocked but happy and laughed. Ron was still a 15-year-old child. Looking at the fully armed Manor's guards, he was a little scared and asked softly, "Grandpa Homelin, what should I do now?" Ron and Homelin had a way of communicating. Homelin could hear what he said, but other than Ron, outsiders could not see Homelin because he was a soul. "Ron, don't be afraid. They are only trainee swordsmen. Although you have just practiced undead magic, you are also a beginner trainee undead mage, so you don't have to be afraid of them, but there are so many of them and they are armed." Ron's voice was trembling. Facing more than a dozen fully armed men, it would be a lie to say that he was not afraid. Moreover, those people had already surrounded him and pulled out the long swords at their waists. The swords were shining with a cold light. Seeing that Ron was still scared to death, Homelin shook his head and smiled bitterly. He was scared by those shiny armors and shining long swords, but he did not know that these were only superficial things. It should be known that Ron now had the strength of a beginner trainee undead mage. There was no need to be afraid of them at all. Even if he could not beat them, he could still escape. Alas, this child still has too little combat experience. Homelin sighed. It was no wonder. What kind of decent battle could a 15-year-old child from a poor family experience? This could not go on. It was impossible for the path of a strong person to be smooth sailing. Battle was the most precious growth experience. Otherwise, it would be like flowers and plants cultivated in a greenhouse. It was impossible to grow healthily. Chapter 16. Grandpa Homelin, how about you go into my body and help me? The other party approached step by step. Ron was shocked and panicked. He had no choice but to ask Homelin for help. Homelin had already made up his mind that he could not help Ron in this battle. He immediately refused and said, "No. Ron, I can't help you this time." But Ron was about to say something, but he was interrupted by Homelin. "Ron, if you want to become strong, you have to face all challenges bravely, and not always think about others helping you. I can help you for a while, but I can't help you for a lifetime. You still have to rely on yourself to walk the path in the future. Don't you want to avenge your grandfather?" Homelin's words were like a blow to the head, waking Ron up. Especially his grandfather's revenge, it was like a thorn in his body, causing his heart to ache faintly. "I want to avenge Grandpa." Ron's eyes turned red and his gaze became determined. His heart was like a ball of fire. "If I can't even pass this stage, how can I avenge Grandpa?" The captain of the Naka guards looked at Ron, who had given up resisting, and suddenly became determined. He was slightly startled and said coldly, "You brat, you actually want to resist. Don't you want to live?" Ron didn't answer. Instead, with a thought, he ordered a few skeleton warriors to attack. "That's right, Ron. Overcome the fear in your heart. The enemy in front of you is indeed a challenge, but they are not as strong as you think. Ron, you have to remember that the most terrifying enemy is not undefeatable, but the most difficult enemy to defeat is actually yourself. Grandpa Hamelin. I understand. Ron's gaze was firm. His heart and body gradually entered a state of battle. I won't back down. Go, kill this kid. The captain of the Naka guards ordered. Several guards pounced on Ron like hungry wolves, slashing down fiercely with their swords. These guards were originally hooligans in this area, so their attacks were naturally unmethodical. Other than the powerful armor on their bodies, there was nothing special about them. At this moment, they were like hooligans fighting. The skeleton warrior raised the bone shield in his hand and blocked the Naka guard's sword. What? You can actually block my attack? A guard's eyes widened. While he was in a daze, a black shadow flashed past him and went straight for his eyes. Bang! The black thing went straight into the guy's eye socket. The bone spear directly pierced through that person's head, and a large amount of brain matter and blood flew backwards, splashing onto the faces of the people behind him. After a blood-curdling scream, the guard fell down unwillingly. Even in death, he would never have thought that he would die at the hands of a 15-year-old child. What was even more unexpected was that a mere bone spike would take his life. The captain's heart trembled. He didn't expect a little child to be so powerful. Damn it, isn't undead magic the most useless magic? Ron's first battle was a victory. He killed a fully armed Naka guard in one fell swoop, and his confidence increased greatly. At this time, the bone spike in his hand flew out, and in the blink of an eye, he killed another one. The captain of the Naka guard gritted his teeth and said loudly, "Don't tangle with those skeleton warriors. Just kill that child." The captain's decision was correct. His eyes were so sharp that he could see that Ron was the core of all the skeleton warriors at a glance. As long as he was killed, those skeleton warriors would collapse without a fight. The captain decided to take action himself. He waved his sword and pounced on Ron. How could Ron fight him head-on? He commanded a skeleton warrior to fight with him. The skeleton warrior's strength was beyond his expectations. A mere skeleton warrior could entangle him and make him unable to move. At this time, Ron had already entered a state of battle. He had a feeling that he could grasp the situation of the entire battlefield. This feeling was very mysterious, but it was also very real. Every move of the enemy fell into his eyes. Every skeleton warrior was entangled with one or two Naka guards. The dozen or so people on the opposite side seemed to have been separated by him. They were originally a group, but they had become separate fighters. And all of this was caused by Ron. Ron's agile body quickly dodged to the side. With a wave of his hand, he muttered to himself. Not long after, a small bone spike appeared in his hand. With a cold smile on his face, Ron observed the movements of every Naka guard. Suddenly, the soles of a guard's feet slipped, revealing a small flaw. Good opportunity. Of course, Ron wouldn't let go of such an obvious opportunity. He waved his hand gently, as if throwing. The bone spike carried black soul power, like a pornographic novel. The arrow that was shot out of his hand flew out at an extremely fast speed. What a precise sneak attack. The target was the guard's foot. With such a tricky angle and a strange attack, the guard could only watch as the bone spike flew over, but he couldn't dodge it. Bang! With a bang, the bone spike shot into his thigh, causing blood to flow. The guard gritted his teeth and took a step back. While he was in a daze, the skeleton warrior beside him suddenly pounced on him, and the sharp bone sword accurately cut through his soft neck. A headless corpse fell to the ground, and the blood on the broken neck spurted high into the air. Another Naka guard died. What a perfect cooperation! Seeing this, Hamelin secretly praised in his heart. For Ron, this undead magic seemed to be tailor-made for him. A small body, powerful soul power, and the rarest thing was his talent in undead magic. In just a short day, He had learned two skills, the skeleton warrior and the bone spike, and could use them to perfection. He could be described as a genius. As his understanding of undead magic deepened, Ron became more and more proficient in using it, and his confidence was built up bit by bit. At this moment, a Naka guard forced back the skeleton warrior that had been pestering him and approached him in 2 or 3 strides. "Go to hell!" The Naka guard raised his sword high and slashed down on Ron's head. This sword strike could directly split the thin Ron in half. Ron had already seen the sinister smile on the guard's face. For some reason, Ron's heart became clear. He dodged the sword that was slashing down and rolled on the ground. His thin figure directly crashed into the guy's arms. The guard was quick-witted and grabbed Ron's shoulder. He smiled and said, "You still want to run?" At such a close distance, if an adult wanted to catch a child, wouldn't it be easy to do so? Before he could be happy, the guard felt a pain in his chest. When he lowered his head, he saw that there was a short bone spur in his abdomen. The bone spur was connected to Ron's small hand. A trace of ruthlessness flashed in Ron's eyes. He was only 15 years old, and he was born with a fierce will to risk his life. Good, good, good. Homelin's eyes lit up. Generally speaking, undead mages were the same as mages. They were most afraid of close combat. This was a nightmare for any profession that focused on magic. Being approached by the other party would put them in an extremely disadvantageous situation. But just now Ron was quick-witted. He rolled directly into the other party's arms and summoned the bone spur at the same time. The most surprising thing was that the bone spur, which was originally a long-range attack, turned into the most fatal dagger in his hand. He took advantage of the opportunity to get close and sent it into the opponent's soft abdomen. There was no armor protection there, so it was easily inserted. Ron's use of undead magic was too flexible. One had to know that he had only learned 2 skills, and he hadn't learned them for a long time. After his cooperation and combination, it actually produced such great power. Homelin's eyes were a little expectant. What would happen if Ron learned all the undead magic? 7 or 8 of the Naka guards had already fallen. Except for the 3 that were killed by Ron's bone spur, the remaining few were cut down by the skeleton warriors. The combat strength of these skeleton warriors could not be underestimated. "Ron, why is he so powerful? Even the Naka guards are no match for him. Is he still that little beggar?" In a battle, there was never a lack of onlookers. The townsfolk of Maple Leaf Town did not leave. Seeing Ron's great power, they were nervous. Some people even regretted their impulsiveness. However, they were all thinking that since Ron's undead magic was so powerful, why did he stay in Maple Leaf Town for more than 10 years and still dream of becoming a mage every day? They did not know that Ron had only learned undead magic for a day. By the time the captain came back to his senses, all his men had fallen in a short moment. No. Impossible! The captain watched as his men were easily killed by Ron's bone spur. His face was full of disbelief. How could undead magic be so powerful? Hadn't this been proven to be useless magic? No, this isn't undead magic. This isn't undead magic. A voice shouted in the captain's heart. You're the only one left. At some point, corpses had fallen on the ground. The little child was already standing in front of him. 4 or 5 skeleton warriors were lined up to guard his left, right, and back. This was the most standard combat posture. In the blink of an eye, all his men died at the hands of this 15-year-old boy. Ron's face was as calm as water. He looked at him calmly as if he was looking at prey. In his eyes, this guard was full of flaws. As long as the skeleton warriors went up to entangle him and found the right opportunity, the bone spur could pierce his heart. The captain of the Naka guards was a young man in his 20s. He calmed down and slowly lowered the tip of the sword in his hand. He asked in a deep voice, "I am Groot, the captain of the guards of the Naka Manor. You? Who the hell are you?" Ron smiled, revealing a row of white teeth. He stared at Groot, the captain of the Naka guards, and said word by word. I am Ron. Necromancer, Ron! At this time, a bright light suddenly appeared in the sky, followed by a clap of thunder that rang in everyone's ears. The sky was filled with dark clouds at some point, and it was about to rain. Chapter 17. In the small square outside the gate of Maple Leaf Town, Groot and Ron were confronting each other. Both sides were wary of each other. Groot frowned. Are you a necromancer? How come it's different from the legends? Ron was silent. He didn't know what the so-called legendary necromancer was like. At this time, he suddenly felt that his knowledge and vision were too narrow. The place outside Maple Leaf Town was a blank. Seeing that he didn't answer, Groot said to himself, "But it doesn't matter whether you are a necromancer or not. You have violated the laws of the Holy Roman Empire, and the owner of Manor Naka, Geralt, has given an order to capture you alive at all costs. If you can't be captured alive, you will be destroyed on the spot. Then you can try." Ron didn't want to talk nonsense with him, and directly let the skeleton warriors rush forward. Groot stared at the 4 or 5 skeleton warriors roaring and rushing forward. His face was gloomy. "Like water," he said in a hoarse voice. "Originally, I didn't intend to use this trick here. Maybe it's time." He slowly pulled the sword back and made an attacking posture. There was a slight change in the surrounding airflow, as if there was a force constantly pulling. His momentum was constantly condensing. Ron's face was dignified. He noticed the change in his opponent. In his soul, there was a hint of danger reminding him. At the moment when the skeleton warriors were about to get close, Groot had finished gathering power and he shouted, "Sword of Flame!" The sword in Groot's hand suddenly emitted a large amount of flame. The flame burned on the sword and the sword became a sword of flame. This trick was his last life-saving trick. It was extremely powerful. When he was cultivating, he didn't think that he would use this trick against a 15-year-old child. Sure enough, after the sword of flame appeared, its power increased several times. With a swing of the sword, a skeleton warrior was split in half in the air. The skeleton scattered and fell to the ground. What? Ron was shocked. The power of this trick was indeed beyond his expectations. Attack together! Ron gritted his teeth and commanded the remaining skeleton warriors to swarm forward. However, numbers didn't seem to have much of an effect. With a wave of the flaming sword, all the skeletal warriors melted like snow in the spring when they came into contact with the flaming sword. They weren't even a match for the flaming sword. Around Groot, 7 or 8 skeletons had already fallen. These skeletons were all cut in half by the flame sword, as if they were rotten wood. Ron didn't even have the strength to fight back. He only had one skeleton warrior left, and this skeleton warrior's hand had already been cut off. Bone Spike, the situation had taken a turn for the worse. Ron was anxious. If even the last skeleton warrior fell, then no one would be able to save him. If the enemy got close to him, then he wouldn't have any strength to fight back. Before he could react, he launched a sneak attack. Clang! The flying bone spike was blocked by the flaming sword. The flames were blazing, reflecting Groot's ferocious face. "It's useless, Ron. I've already seen through your tricks." After that, he gently waved his sword. The flaming sword flashed with a dazzling light. The last skeleton warrior fell, and its bones were broken on the ground. Ron didn't think that things would turn out like this. He took a step back in horror. As a junior apprentice necromancer, he only knew these 2 skills. Who knew that they would be easily broken by the opponent? He had no other way. That captain is very strong. Ron is finished. This Ron, he actually dares to practice evil undead magic in the sacred Maple Leaf Town. Damn it! A townsman cursed fiercely. "Kill him! Kill him! Kill him!" It was unknown who started to shout, but the voice gradually grew louder. These townsfolk all supported the captain of the Naka guards. In the face of evil undead magic, these townsfolk easily formed a united front. After all, they were all residents of the Holy Roman Empire. Groot licked his lips cruelly. See, these townsfolk who have been with you for so many years, they all want you to die. Ron bit his lips tightly. Groot approached step by step and said to himself, in order to deal with you, I actually used the flaming sword. Shame, it's a shame. He raised his sword high and shouted, Ron, this shame can only be washed away with your blood. What should I do? What should I do? Ron had already been forced to a corner. His heart was burning with anxiety. The pride he had felt at the beginning had disappeared without a trace. At this moment, Homelin's voice sounded in a timely manner. Ron, this guy just used a secret method to forcibly increase his strength. In fact, with his current strength as a senior apprentice warrior, it's impossible for him to use the flaming sword. This is a skill belonging to a junior warrior. Grandpa Homelin, what should I do now? I can't think of anything at all. Ron's heart was full of despair. Am I destined to die here today? Hee, things are not that bad. Homelin laughed. He used the skill to forcibly increase his strength, so it's bound to not last long. As long as you drag it out, the final victory will still be yours. But Grandpa, how can I drag it out? My skeleton warriors are no match for him at all? Ron said nervously. Don't be afraid, I'll teach you the skeleton restoration spell now. As long as you understand this magic, it won't be a problem to hold him back, Homelin smiled. He stretched out his hand and a black light shot into Ron's mind. Ron's mind immediately showed a spell and its operation method. Apprentice-level undead magic was not very difficult. Ron quickly thought about it in his mind. At this moment, the other party had already rushed over. Groot pounced on Ron and slashed with his sword. Ron's reaction was agile. He ducked and rolled on the ground to avoid the sword. The hot sword wind blew on his face, and Ron only felt his face burning. Groot, the captain of the Naka guards, waved his fire sword repeatedly, and Ron barely dodged. The situation was extremely tense. Skeleton restoration spell, Ron didn't think too much, and now there was no time to think carefully. He quickly used this spell based on his instinct and understanding of undead magic. A miracle appeared. The scattered bones on the ground seemed to be summoned. With a crash sound, they began to combine, and soon became a skeleton warrior, exactly the same as before. 4 or 5 skeleton warriors stood up, and there was a faint green flame in their eyes, more fierce than before. Skeleton restoration spell, apprentice-level magic, consumes very little soul power, uses fast, and is much more convenient than resummoning skeleton warriors. Ron knew that Homelin was teaching him, and listened without a word. At the same time, he commanded the skeleton warriors to block in front of him. Still the same trick? This trick is useless against me. Groot snorted coldly, not afraid, and stepped forward. With just a light wave, a skeleton warrior was smashed, and the bones scattered on the ground. Before he could catch his breath, Ron gently waved his hand, and the skeleton warriors reassembled and stood up again. What? How is that possible? Groot was shocked, and then his face sank. I said, this trick is useless against me. He waved his sword again, and smashed a few skeleton warriors. As he thought, the skeleton warriors quickly stood up again. At this time, Groot fell into a vicious circle. He wanted to kill Ron, but these skeleton warriors were always in front of Ron. If he wanted to kill him, he had to clean up these skeleton warriors. But when one was cut down, these monsters stood up and scathed. Groot gradually felt tired. As Homelin said, he used a skill above his level, which brought great damage to his body, and he couldn't last long. He was exhausted. Ron was also sensitive enough to notice this. He sneered and said, in that case, how about adding 2 more? He muttered, and under his command, 2 skeleton warriors stood up from the ground, and the number of skeleton warriors besieging Groot increased to 7. Huff, 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 impossible, impossible, how could I lose to a necromancer? Groot gasped, and the flame of the long sword in his hand became dimmer and dimmer. After a while it disappeared. Go to hell! Ron coldly shouted. At this time, a skeleton warrior suddenly appeared from behind, and a long bone sword pierced Groot's body from the back. He widened his eyes and fell down unwillingly. Ron used his wisdom to win the final victory. What? They're all dead? The captain was killed by him. God, he's only a 15-year-old child. Devil, he must be a devil. The townspeople began to talk and looked at Ron with fear. Ron took a deep breath and stood up. There was some commotion among the townspeople, and they looked at Ron with fear. Only now did they remember their behavior. If Ron came to settle accounts, then the consequences. Ron's emotionless eyes swept over the surrounding townspeople, and a trace of killing intent flashed in his eyes. Is he going to? The townspeople were even more frightened, and some of them had already begun to pray. In the crowd, Ron saw Aunt Susan again, and she looked at him with concern. Ron's heart warmed. This was the place where he grew up, and except for a few confused townspeople, most of the townspeople still cared about him. Ron withdrew his gaze, and didn't look at the townspeople again. Without saying anything, he turned and left. He's gone. The townspeople's frightened emotions slowly calmed down, and they looked at each other and rejoiced. This devil, will he come back? A townspeople asked worriedly. Since he let us go, he won't come back to find trouble with us. An experienced old man said in a deep voice. He sighed slightly. He's still a very innocent child. I know that his dream is to become a great magician. It's a pity that he's now practicing that kind of evil magic. Let's clean this place up. The old man looked around and said helplessly. Chapter 18. At this moment, a few fast horses galloped over, and the dust raised by the horses' hooves floated high into the air. What's going on here? Where's that kid? It was Gerald, his son, and a few others who rode their horses. He received a tip from some of the townsfolk of Maple Leaf Town and quickly ran over. However, Ron had already left for a while. Ah, that's Lord Gerald of the Naka Manor. Some sharp-eyed townspeople noticed the person coming, and their eyes showed fear. In Maple Leaf Town, Gerald's notoriety was as loud as the Naka guards. I just received a report that someone found Ron back. Where's Ron? Gerald got off his horse with a gloomy face. He knew that Ron must have left long ago. Reporting to Lord Gerald, Ron just left. A townsfolk boldly said. Humph! You bunch of lowly people. Gerald was very unhappy now. He was about to scold a few words when suddenly, his eyes widened. He saw Groot lying on the ground. A bad feeling flashed through Gerald's heart. He rushed over and reached out to lift Groot's body. Sure enough, Groot had already been dead for a long time. Groot! Gerald shouted and almost fainted. The captain of the Naka guards, the strongest Groot, was dead. He was actually dead. Who did it? Gerald gritted his teeth, his eyes almost spitting fire. Seeing Gerald lose his composure, the townsfolk were stunned. No one dared to answer him. Gerald stood up with a bang, grabbed a townsfolk by the collar, stared at him with a man-eating gaze and roared, "Tell me, who did it?" Yes, no. I didn't do it. The townsfolk was so frightened by the angry Gerald that he couldn't even speak clearly. Tell me, who is it? Gerald's gaze was murderous. One had to know that the captain of the Naka guards, Groot, was his nephew. Yes, it's that Ron. Among the townsfolk, one of them was bold enough to answer. What? Ron? Gerald was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect that his men would be killed by Ron when he gave the order to hunt him down. Gerard's bloodshot eyes stared at the townsfolk who spoke. You? Are you sure? Yes? Lord Geralt, that Ron practiced evil necromancy magic. He summoned many skeleton-like things and then killed Captain Groot. The townsfolk said while trembling. Bastard, Geralt cursed angrily. He pulled his hair desperately. He didn't know what was wrong with him. In just 2 days, so many things had happened. At this time, he suddenly felt a chill in his heart. Groot was a senior apprentice swordsman. He was only a little bit away from junior swordsman. He didn't know when he would break through, but he was killed by a 15-year-old kid. In other words, this kid's strength was at least at the level of senior apprentice swordsman. That kid, he's only 15. Just the thought of having a grudge with such a person sent chills down Gerard's spine. 15 years old, what level would he grow to in the future? The strength of a senior apprentice swordsman might not be much in the Holy Roman Empire, but in the area of Maple Leaf Town, it was enough to walk sideways. Except for the Holy See, not many people dared to provoke him. At this time, Geralt couldn't help but regret. If he had known that things would turn out like this, he wouldn't have been so ruthless. With his status, he could have gone to apologize to that kid and compensate him appropriately. It wouldn't have cost much. 10 gold coins would have been enough to settle it, and there wouldn't be such a big grudge now. But not only did he not do that, but he also sent people to kill him. Geralt now regretted it. Thinking of this, Geralt couldn't help but stare fiercely at Chitley. This matter was caused by this silly kid. As an aristocrat, Chitley usually did a lot of bad things. Many commoner girls were also ravaged by him. Afterwards, they were settled with money. But this time, father. Chitley was frightened by Geralt's stare and called out timidly. Geralt sighed. Although the matter was caused by Chitley, he was still his son. It was useless to blame him now. Besides, there was also a problem with the way he handled things. Now that things had come to this point, perhaps the grudge couldn't be easily resolved. Father, what do we do now? Chitley's voice was trembling. He knew that he had caused trouble by offending such a powerful character. How many senior apprentice swordsmen were there in the area of Maple Leaf Town? Not to mention that he didn't have the strength of a junior apprentice swordsman, even his father was only a senior apprentice swordsman. Don't look at how arrogant he was in front of these ordinary townspeople. Once he encountered a real powerhouse, he would immediately be terrified. What should we do? Geralt knew that it was useless to regret. On the surface, this child's strength had surpassed Manor Naka. In other words, Manor Naka had no way to deal with him. Unless, father, why don't we look for Aunt? Chitley whispered. Aunt Salter family. Geralt's eyes lit up. As long as the Salter family sent a powerhouse, there was no need to worry about not being able to kill this Ron. No, it's too far. Geralt thought about it and shook his head. The Salter family was in the capital of the Holy Roman Empire. It was a long journey. By the time he invited a powerhouse, Manor Naka would have been razed to the ground. Then what should we do? Chitley was so scared that his face turned pale. Only now did he know how ridiculous his small force was in front of a real powerhouse. I'm afraid there's only one way. Geralt raised his head, his eyes flashing with the light of revenge. Since he had already done it, there was no turning back. The few people from Manor Naka silently collected the corpses and returned. Although these guards weren't very strong, they were all hired with money. Not only were their weapons and equipment provided by Manor Naka, but according to the rules of the Holy Roman Empire, everyone had signed a contract. If they were injured or killed in battle, they would have to pay a pension. This was a large sum of money. Now that so many of them had died, even with Manor Naka's financial resources, they couldn't bear it. Pornographic novels, the equipment of the dead Naka guards was valuable, so they definitely had to take it back. Near the border of Gold's Hire Town, in a special house, this house stood alone by the side of the road, in the middle of nowhere. The house was made of several large wooden pillars. From the outside, it looked rather simple and crude. In the room, there were a few long counters like a bar. There were a few dilapidated tables scattered around, and the stools on them were covered in dirt. Although this room wasn't big and was in a remote location, there were many people going in and out. It was quite lively. In the room, as long as there were stools, they were filled with people. Mercenary Tavern. It was the most sacred place in the hearts of all the mercenaries in the Noah continent. As soon as these mercenaries arrived here, they knew that they were safe. Although the tavern was small, it had everything. Not only could they drink the inferior yellow wine that mercenaries liked, but they could also provide a place to rest. Most importantly, this was the place where missions were issued. After completing the mission, they could even get money here. Many mercenaries liked to stay here every day, staring at the mission bulletin board to see if there were any suitable missions for them. There were many missions, and the bulletin board was densely packed. However, there were very few that were suitable for ordinary mercenaries to do. Many of them needed to go to some dangerous places to complete them. For example, the reward for hunting the blue bull's horn was 500 gold coins. The blue bull was easy to hunt, but the location of the blue bull was in the Chemo Plateau. It was a famous dangerous place. Compared to the effort and risk they had to put in, the reward was too low. Of course, if the reward was increased to 5,000 gold coins, the mercenaries here would definitely rush like vultures. Mercenary missions were divided into S rank, A rank, B rank, D rank, E rank, and so on. Each rank of mission had a considerable reward. The higher the rank of the mission, the higher the reward. Of course, the greater the risk. For an S rank mission, the reward was calculated in hundreds of millions of gold coins. Of course, an S rank mission wasn't something that ordinary people could complete. Most mercenaries would choose D or E rank missions. After completing the mission, they could go to any tavern or mercenary station in the Noah continent to submit the mission. The waiters in the tavern had a special way to contact the mercenary union to confirm the completion of the mission, and then directly pay the reward. The mercenary tavern was such a place. People with mercenary status could enjoy a 20% discount on drinks here. Of course, this didn't include the cost of finding a girl. Inside the tavern, the air was turbid. The sounds of drinking, and quarreling could be heard. In the midst of the toasting, many gorgeous women were shuttling back and forth between the unbearably vulgar mercenaries. Many of the women's breasts were exposed, attracting the lecherous gazes of the male mercenaries. The bold ones would step forward and grab them, causing the women to grumble coquettishly. If the price was right, the women here could follow you upstairs. The women here were all from poor families. For them, this kind of work was too easy. They didn't need to work hard, and could earn enough money for their family to live every month. The mercenaries here were generous, especially those who had just completed a mission and received a reward. When they came out of the hall, many women would rush up to them. It was too easy to earn money from mercenaries. Of course, this was something that only a very sharp eye could see. Geralt and Keatley appeared here. "Father, this is the mercenary tavern?" Keatley came here for the first time. For him, this place was full of novelty. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.